This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It is 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. There was an extraordinary headline yesterday which I thought that I had put to one side in order to bring to your attention today, and I apparently haven't. No major surprises there when it comes to attention to detail and professionalism from your humble correspondent. But it essentially said something like, cancer deaths set to rise exponentially in Starmer's first 5 years in power. And I thought it was such a illuminating headline about what right-wing media is going to be doing for the next 5 years. On what possible planet does the continuing decline of NHS cancer treatment have anything to do with Keir Starmer or the current Health Secretary, Wes Streeting? How absolutely bent, not to mention crooked, would you need to be to conceive of putting a headline like that on top of a story about the consequences of 14 years of Tory government? So the Labour government have told us, Wes Streeting in terms, as the author of a book called How They Broke Britain, I don't know quite how to respond when senior politicians describe huge swathes of the country as being broken. You sort of find yourself thinking perhaps they'd be interested in an explanation of exactly how it happened. But the fact is that anything bad for a foreseeable period of time is going to be a consequence of what went before, not a consequence of what is in power now. Which brings us to the news today, the big story today, that 1,700 prisoners are set to be released. Now, there are two fundamental truths that the kind of people who brought you Brexit, or Boris Johnson, or Liz Truss, or even David Cameron, or who encouraged you to cheer through austerity even as it saw your own children deprived of opportunity and your own libraries closed in their droves. The kind of people who encouraged you or persuaded you to do all of those things, very keen that you're unaware of two central points. The first is prisoners are already released early. This is a shift in the percentage of the sentence that will actually be served. We've already seen a shift in that percentage under the last government, but the relationship between prison places and people in need of prison places is now so completely broken. It's popping up a lot, that word, isn't it? Completely broken to the point where if they don't release people from prison who should be there for a bit longer, they won't be able to put people in prison who haven't spent any time there at all yet. And the second thing that they're keen you don't know is that prisoners are returned to prison in this country on a pitiful basis, a shamefully high basis. It's why Edward Timpson, who has thus far been notable chiefly by his absence but since being made a prison minister by Keir Starmer. It's why Edward Timpson is charged as a prisons minister in the House of Lords with revolutionising rehabilitation, i.e. the single most important contribution you could make to reducing the need for prison places is quite probably reducing recidivism. Reducing repeat offending, reducing the number of prisoners who walk out of the prison gates and before you've boiled the kettle for your pot noodle in the guards' canteen, they're walking back in again because they've committed another crime. So those two things are baked in to our justice system. Early release from prison and recidivism and return to prison after reoffending, whether you were released early or not. And yet, you know and I know that if and when one of the 1,700 prisoners set to be released today reoffends and returns to prison, it's likely to be front-page news. It's a bit like yesterday, where everybody was pretending to be terrified about the prospect of pensioners dying of the cold, despite the fact that they have been dying of the cold every year, according to the government's own statistics. But suddenly, because of the nature of this strange and broken country, suddenly people who didn't give a hoot about pensioners dying of the cold when Rishi Sunak was Prime Minister or when Liz Truss was Prime Minister, it was unlikely anyone died of the cold when Liz Truss was Prime Minister because of the calendar and the brevity of her tenure. Boris Johnson, Theresa May, David Cameron, who of course brought in austerity, which made everybody more likely to suffer from cold and hunger and all the other sort of great sins against humanity that politicians can inflict upon us. James Timpson, not Edward Timpson, sorry, my apologies. His brother's called Ed. I always get... Do you want to know something funny? Do you want to know why I get James Timpson and Edward Timpson mixed up? You would have to be something of a JOB nut to know the answer to this question. I'm fairly confident that none of my colleagues actually know the answer to this question. Keith, do you know why I get James Timpson and Edward Timpson mixed up? Or not just the Timpsons. Do you know why I get James and Edward mixed up so routinely? It's nothing to do with Jedward, although you're on the right track with that one. It's because they're my names. I'm James Edward. So James and Edward, to me, I always sort of you wouldn't get them mixed up because they don't sound like each other. It's not like getting James and John mixed up or Edward and Edwin. But for me, James Edward is Edward. So it's James Timpson, who is in the House of Lords, charged with rehabilitating offending. Edward's a nice name, isn't it, actually? I think it might be a nicer name than James. It's certainly a bit less common. But I digress quite violently on reflection. And what you need to do, what we need to do, as these sort of parts of a rare corner of public discourse where we tried desperately and have tried desperately since 2016 to cling on to reality, even while everybody else was subscribing to various theories of unicorns and fantasy. You have to be clear what you should be criticising. And that's especially true when it is politicians in whom you have high hopes. So uncritical treatment of Keir Starmer is dangerous. Uncritical treatment of the Labour movement, the Labour government, is dangerous. But there's no way that anybody is ever going to start claiming that things haven't happened or that appalling abuses of power like the Owen Paterson scandal or the promotion of utterly and obviously inadequate human beings like Nadine Dorries or Jacob Rees-Mogg. Hopefully we're never going to fall into those doldrums or the carnal callousness of let the bodies pile high or having parties in Downing Street. Those days are hopefully behind us, but it doesn't let the new lot off the hook. So who's best placed to answer these two questions? How did we get into such a mess? How did we get into such a place where there are more people in need of prison places than there are prisoners? And secondly, I'll say it. As far as I can tell, there's no alternative whatsoever to releasing prisoners early. Some sentence is better than no sentence, right? And that is the choice that the justice system is currently presented with. Some sentence is better than no sentence. So you've got a choice. Do we give people some sentence or do we give people no sentence? If we don't let prisoners out early, then all of the people who have been sentenced to prison but can't go because there aren't any places, they get no sentence. They spend no time in prison for the foreseeable future. Or we let them out early, which means they've served some sentence, but not enough, according to the tariff handed down by the judge who sat at their actual trial, so we don't get to argue with that. We let them out early so that the ones who would otherwise serve no sentence serve some sentence. So I mention all that business about critical analysis because I could be wrong. I could be suffering from my own very mild form of footballification. I'm still a little bit high upon the fumes of getting rid of the people responsible for breaking Britain, for bringing the NHS to its knees, for rendering the prison system almost unfit for purpose, for presiding over rises in your mortgages that you may not be able to afford. I mean, there's a little bit of relief attached to all of those things. The disappearance from public life of people like Boris Johnson. There should be street parties for this kind of thing. But I don't want the fumes of that giddiness to corrupt my ability to see the bigger picture. So here's what I think the bigger picture is. What possible alternative can there be? I think one of Nick's callers this morning suggested the Bibi Stockholm, which is quite an extraordinary bout of weapons-grade hypocrisy, even by the standards of people who don't like thinking too deeply about issues. 10 minutes ago, the Bibi Stockholm was a holiday camp, right? Because we were going to put asylum seekers on it. In fact, we did put asylum seekers on it. And the suggestion that it was in any way unkind or in any way punitive or in any way negative or a deterrent, that was dismissed out of hand. Oh, it's absolutely lovely. It's fine. And then suddenly it's now a prison. So it wasn't a prison when they were putting asylum seekers on it, but it would now be a prison despite not being a prison if we were to put prisoners in it. That's the problem with simplistic solutions to complicated questions. They're quite seductive. 1,700 people being released today. I mean, on what possible planet would it be possible to stick them on a boat that is not currently a prison in the middle of a harbour in the south of England? So if you if you exclude idiotic answers, if you actually say no, you're not allowed to be an idiot, the question is what can they do? I keep saying this. It might become a bit of a recurring theme in the coming months. You're not allowed to be an idiot. I've got a whole corner for you if you text in, but you can't ring in and be an idiot. All right. So suggesting that you can put prisoners in a barge, that's just being an idiot. So if you're not going to be an idiot, what is the answer to the question? What could the government do about the situation they have inherited? Let me nail another example of, let me nail another example of idiot as well. So if you're drawing comparisons between sentences that have absolutely nothing to do with the Farage riots and sentences linked to the Farage riots, then you're missing a key point of sentencing. Actually, let me take that back. That this doesn't make you an idiot. You're only an idiot if you still think what I'm about to describe after I've explained why it's wrong. If you think it now, you're just a victim of the kind of gaslighting and grooming that would see some people suggest that you can stick prisoners on the Bibby Stockholm. So if you're saying, oh, well, it's outrageous, no wonder the prisons are full because the sentences being handed down for the Farage rioters are so much higher than the sentences being handed down for ... So, and then you insert other crimes. Part of the reason for the severity of the sentences handed down to the Farage rioters is categorically the need to deter people from behaving similarly in the future. If, for example, Nigel Farage gets another completely made-up story from the alleged people trafficker Andrew Tate's Twitter account and decides to share it with his millions of followers, while couching it in the language of just asking questions about complete lies, and other people, somewhat hard of thinking or easily riled, decide to try to set fire to a hotel full of refugees again, then the plan, the thinking, the idea is they'll be less likely to do so if they know they could go to jail for 9 years. They know they could be sentenced to jail for 3 or 4 years. If they're thinking of throwing a brick at a police officer if these riots ever flare up again. So when you find a crime in which the sentencing is in no way designed to be a public deterrent, you can't compare it to crimes where the sentencing is categorically designed to be a public deterrent. So if you didn't understand that before I explained it, that's absolutely fine. If you're still claiming that it's relevant to the conversation about prison places, then I'm afraid you're an idiot. And you're not allowed to answer these questions with idiotic answers. So that's the Bibby Stockholm out of the way. That's the death penalty out of the picture. And that is they shouldn't be sentencing the Farage rioters so severely, closed down as well. So all of those answers are idiotic. So and also, should we do one more Idiot's Corner? The man in Pakistan who was charged with or investigated for spreading the misinformation that prompted the riots has been found not guilty. Richard has got in touch, I think, presuming that that's a powerful point. He's been found not guilty of starting it, Richard, which makes it more likely that it was indeed started here. So again, try not to be an idiot. Could be my next book, How Not to Be an Idiot. So if you remove all of the idiotic answers, what are you left with? I think you're left with inevitability. What else can you do? Here is a quart of water. And here is a pint pot. You need to get some of the quart into the pint pot. But guess what? It's full. So if you need to get some of the water from this bucket into this pint pot, actually, no, that doesn't even work, does it? It doesn't need to be a bucket. Here's a small tumbler of water, right? A small tumbler. Here's a shot glass. Here is a shot glass of water. And here is a pint pot. And they are both full. And you need to get some of the water in the shot glass into the pint pot, right? Everybody agrees that the people in the pint pot have already been punished. Whether they've been punished enough or not is moot. It doesn't matter because they've been punished more than the people in the shot glass. So if you've got a full pint pot and a full shot glass and you've got to get some of the water in the shot glass into the pint pot, what are you going to do with the pint pot? This isn't an opinion. This is counting. What are you going to do with the pint pot? Spoiler alert, you're going to have to pour some of the water out in order to empty the shot glass into it. And that is why almost every syllable of coverage of this story that I have seen is wrong-headed to the point of corruption, to the point of being entirely of a piece with all the lies and all the nonsense that they told us in support of the last lot, which they're now simply re-engineering in bogus condemnation of the new lot. So you tell me the alternative. How did we get to a place where we have more people in need of prison places than we have prison places? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And the second question that I've got for you is, what else, given what they inherited, given the current situation, given the need for very, very, very deterrent-driven sentencing in the case of the Farage riots, what else could they do? Hit the numbers now. You will get through.
James O'Brien on LBC.
So there it is. I don't know whether perhaps suggesting that we send prisoners to Rwanda should be added to the list of idiotic answers that are not allowed. It's against the law to send asylum seekers to Rwanda, so they had to change the law. And the law is there to protect you. Imagine if your mum got done for shoplifting and you'd sent me a WhatsApp saying we should send them all to Rwanda. You wake up next Tuesday, your mum's in Rwanda. There's also human rights legislation about how easy it is to visit. Anyway, I'm overusing the word idiot at the moment, but cometh the hour, cometh the vocabulary. How did we get into this situation? And what else could the current government have done? You've got a shot glass full of water, you've got a pint pot full of water. You need to get some of the water in the shot glass into the pint pot. How are you going to do that without emptying out some of the water currently in the pint pot? All right? Riddle me that. Tuesday is in Brentford, God's own country. Tuesday, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Hello. I mean, I believe that the problem stems from the misuse of remand, and also the fact that some of these sentences are a good fraction of the prisoners are serving can be served in the community. I know when we recommend community, the first thing everybody goes, oh, we don't have the infrastructure for it, so let's build it. There's so many things that could be done in each community that they could do as community payback. Our streets are dirty, things need cleaning. I feel like we're not seeing the bigger picture.
Just to be clear, Tuesday, Brentford's going through a bit of a renaissance at the moment, but lots of other areas are absolutely filthy.
Yeah, there's so many things, and people who are actually tradespeople and people who can help the community could pay back in other ways.
So I
feel like we're missing a trick here.
Well, I think you're right, and I think this is very much something that will be on James Timpson's to-do list. But you're answering the question of how we ended up in this mess, not the question of whether or not the government could do anything differently. That's not a criticism; it's just a clarification, because it's not.
We did end up in this mess because obviously judges are choosing to imprison people when they could send them to the community. There's a lack of communication between the prison and the judges, because I'm surely that they should be sharing the data of what the level of prison spaces are before they make these decisions.
But this was also a political choice in the same way that sentencing the Farage rioters needs to deliver a deeply deterrent message to people thinking about maybe setting fire to a hotel full of asylum seekers or throwing wheelie bins at the police next time the usual suspects start spreading racist lies.
No, I agree with you about the rioters. I'm in no disagreement.
But the political choice. Stop interrupting me when I'm interrupting you. Sorry. It's unbearable. The political choice of the last government was to send long sentences and stiff sentences and lots of prison because it kept the Daily Mail happy. And that's why you've got people in jail who should have been sentenced to other things, I think.
Yeah, but I do believe there is a large amount of people who are serving 6 months and under who could be in the community serving their sentence, which would free up the spaces for the people serving longer sentences, if that makes sense.
Of course it makes sense. But in terms of what else could the government do now, and I'm going to draw you back to my pint pot analogy, here is a full shot glass. Here is a full pint pot. How do you get some of the water into the shot glass without emptying out some of the pint pot?
Sentence review. Sentence review to review maybe if the sentences were too
but you're still emptying out the pint pot, aren't you?
there has to be some balance.
There has to be some water removed from the pint pot, with however you dice it. You can, or you leave the shot glass free. You leave everybody who has been convicted of crimes in the shot glass at large, at free, and nobody would want that. So they cannot win. That's the point I'm trying to make. Thank you, Tuesday. You cannot win. If they announced we're not going to send people convicted of these crimes to prison, there'd be an even greater uproar than when they announced we're going to release people convicted of these crimes from prison a little bit earlier than we otherwise would have done. And there is the state of this country still, even with a new government in place. And of course, a fascinating piece of news today about how people are getting their news now from other sources. It's not necessarily good news, because the online news sources can be just as bonkers as the old school news sources. But until the stranglehold on public discourse exercised by precisely the people that brought you austerity, Brexit, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss mortgage rates, all of that, while, of course, you're also encouraged to obsess endlessly about immigration while they're picking your pockets and selling your country to the highest bidder. Until that stranglehold on the UK media is broken, we end up with days like today when people are saying, I can solve this problem. We'll put all the prisoners on the Bibi Stockholm barge. Extraordinary, really, when you think about it, because the problems are real and the solution at the moment is inevitable. I think. I could be wrong. It has been known. Darren is in Toddington. Darren, what do you reckon?
Good morning. I think the lady before sort of had my thunder, as it were.
Okay.
But sorry.
No, I was about to interrupt, and then I thought I'm interrupting too much, and now I'm interrupting to explain that I'm interrupting too much.
Right. Okay. So, I think there's a lot of people in prison that don't need to be in prison. I think they need to be punished. And I think I've said this for years and years. I've always moaned about this, and people do tell me to shut up about it. I think if you're a danger to the public, in whatever sense, and that includes rioters who throw bricks at police and all of that, you are violent. You are a danger to the public. Yeah. You should be locked up. Full stop. Yeah. However long the sentence. But I think there's lots of people who, like, I was talking to your researcher, someone, for instance, who's been done for fraud. Yeah. Now, to me, they're not a physical danger to the public. But what we could have done, which we should have done years ago, is use these people in the community. We should have tagged them. We should have been giving them thousands of hours community service and get something out of them.
Would you rather be slapped or robbed?
Slapped or robbed? Oh, I don't know. Probably.
Hey, there's your problem.
Slapped.
There's your problem. There you go. There's your flipping problem. Yes, exactly. There's your problem.
Well, how's that? I don't get it.
Because the people that robbed you have offended you more than the people who slapped you, and they're the ones going free.
Okay. Hang on. No,
you can't change your mind now. You can't change your answer, Darren.
No, because when you meant robbed, I thought you meant robbed in the street by someone, not slapped. Right. So if I got robbed online, I would want that. Right, that person. I don't see what's the point in putting them in prison. Make them work. And I'll tell you
Darren,
why.
I've got a prescription for you.
I've got a reason why.
Go on then.
Right, again, I've had to do, a few years ago, I had to do 150 hours community service.
Okay.
And it was the biggest pain in the bum I've ever had to do in my life. And yes. I mean, I lost we worked it out, 19 Saturdays, I lost 19 Saturdays. I had to work in a charity shop. Yeah. It wasn't the work in the charity shop was the issue. I lost my Saturdays.
I did not know that you could work in a charity shop as part of your community service.
You can. So, some won't take anyone that's been done for violence, and some will take normal. I done 150 hours in a local community charity shop, and
for violence.
I'll be honest. I'll tell you. Hang on.
All right.
Let me just say, okay. At the time I was 50 years old.
Yeah.
I'm overweight.
Yeah.
I don't drink. 2 guys picked a fight. They lost. I got done. Okay.
Okay.
It's really that simple.
Well, it is not. It's obviously not that simple. Otherwise, the judge would be agreeing with you.
Yeah, but it was. I don't.
But it wasn't. But let's not get bogged down in that. Right. But that you think that was a very efficient punishment for you, better than going to jail.
I'll tell you what.
Because you lost all your Saturdays. But if you'd gone to jail, you'd have lost your Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays and Sundays as well. So it would have been an even better punishment.
It might have done, but it stopped me giving someone else a slap when they start.
Well, that's a deterrent, you see.
And it made me walk away. It makes me walk away, and it makes me think, I don't need this.
But you're not really arguing that working in a charity shop is a worse punishment than being in prison.
No, it's not. But you could say to someone, right, for the next year, like 1,000 hours or whatever, you will be cleaning the streets. You will be emptying bins. You will be, I don't know, things that we've
people
lost
do that.
out
So that's
on.
people's jobs, mate. What's going to happen to the people who currently do that for a living?
They help them, and they help them make their job even easier.
I don't know. Well, it's an interesting thought, but I challenge. There's one element of your thinking that I genuinely, violently reject. All right, and that is the idea that being a victim of certain types of crime is not as traumatic as being a victim of violence. Online fraud. People take, for a trigger warning here for people affected by it. People take their own lives after being victims of online fraud.
No, they do, and when it comes to something that serious, but I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people in prison that have done very minor things that could.
I think there's a class issue. So some middle class bloke who rips off old age pensioners walks free, but a working class bloke who has a fight with two men and they lose and he gets done, he goes to jail. I don't like that. But I've got a prescription for you, Darren. I might start offering prescriptions to my callers. I want you to go this evening. I want you to watch The Beekeeper, starring Jason Statham.
Seen it.
Well, how can you possibly say that victims of online fraud aren't it's not as bad as being a victim of violence?
I just think that these people could be you could use them.
You think that the people Jason Statham tracked down in The Beekeeper could have been set to work emptying bins instead of exposed to 1,000 torturous experiences without wanting to give away the ending of the film?
Do right, they should, and then we'd have empty bins, and when I go to throw my McDonald's wrapper and other fast food in the bin, it would be empty.
Burgers are available. All right, Darren. Yeah. In some ways, we all agree about the inevitability of what the government is currently doing. In the current crisis, what else can it do but release prisoners early? How does it avoid arriving at situations like this in the future? Well, you either double down on where we've been before and start building loads more prisons and keep the sentencing punitive and keep the returning to jail rates high, or you have a complete rethink about the system, which could or could not include the suggestions made by both Darren and Tuesday. It's 10:32. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Thomas Watts is here now with the headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:36 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's a long time. You know, the Labour leader to win a general election before Keir Starmer was Tony Blair. And I think the biggest difference, I don't think I've said this to you before because I've only just realised it in the last 30 minutes. The biggest difference between Tony Blair and Keir Starmer, and this ties in with the other story today about people getting their news from different sources. Keir Starmer has to break with the fear of the newspaper headlines, break with the fear of the front pages, front pageophobia. There you go. He has to. I'll tell you why briefly. The caller so far of a piece with the idea that we send too many people to jail, right? Imagine for a moment a very lazy right-wing tabloid opinionator, somebody who thought that Brexit would be a good idea but couldn't tell you why. Somebody who constantly invites you to be terrified of immigrants without really telling you why. Just think of, exactly the type I've got in mind. A very lazy right-wing commentator. And if they are currently professing to be frightened about people being released from jail or worried about what it might mean for your mum or your community, how would they feel if instead of going to jail, offenders, initially non-violent offenders, were emptying your bins or sweeping up your street? So he has to. The things that he does, if he is genuinely to improve the state of the nation, the single simplest step he needs to take first is to cut his entire administration loose from front pageophobia, because the people who write the biggest front pages are a huge part of the problems that we're currently in. Enemies of the people attacking the judges. Crush the saboteurs, attacking democratically elected politicians. Who the hell elected Paul Dacre? Who elected Viscount Rothermere? Who elected the Barclay brothers or Andrew Neil? Who elected these people? These front pages that previous governments, previous administrations have been frightened of. The very first thing that Keir Starmer needs to do, and I think possibly with the winter fuel payments and possibly with a speech he's set to give later today about trade unions, is actually tell the rabble-rousing, unevidenced, provocative print media in this country that he doesn't really care what they say anymore. Whereas Tony Blair would argue that he absolutely had to. I've asked him about that, and He kind of conceded that he probably bent a little bit too far to accommodate the Rupert Murdochs of this world. I mean, certainly ending up godfather to one of his children constitutes, I would say, a bend too far. But he would still argue that he had little choice, such was the necessity of pragmatism in politics. I don't think Starmer needs to worry about these people. Put them on the Bibi Stockholm kind of attitude or send them to Rwanda. I don't think anyone getting paid for their opinions would suggest sending them to Rwanda. But that for me, front pageophobia. If Keir Starmer proves not to suffer from front pageophobia, then he's got a chance of pulling this off. Ryan's in Hackney. Back to the prisons, Ryan. What would you like to say?
I'd like to say that I think, just leaning on what you just said, is that it's a massive storm in a headline teacup. And the majority of these 1,700 prisoners, and I've spoken to a few friends that are in prison just yesterday, they're all, the majority of these prisoners are already in the community. The majority of them coming from open prisons where they're already going home every weekend, working in the community Monday to Friday. So I think we need to be worried about like the headlines that we're reading.
Yes.
Like when I spent a substantial amount of time in prison in my late teens, majority of my 20s. It was spread over 3 long prison sentences. Right. And I can honestly tell you now, hand on my heart, looking back, nothing I'd done in prison was to stop me from reoffending. Not one thing. Apart from during the period of the punishment side of it, you're not out and you can't offend. That's it. I changed my life around because I just met one friend who put me into a different circle of friends, and then that circle of friends led me to a different circle of friends, and then I got into work, a brand new career, and I've never looked back. I just went with the flow of things during my time in prison. If they asked me to do a course to keep the probation service happy, I'll do it. I had prison officers say to me on a regular basis, "Don't even know why you're here." Do I think prison sentences are too long? Yes, I do. Do I think prison's been failing? It's been failing for a long time. When I was in prison, I think it was John Reid was the Home Secretary,
yes,
I'm sure
right,
of it.
yes.
And he came to visit the prison, and they were releasing prisoners then early. It's changed already. When I was in prison, you got, if you had a 10-year sentence, you done 5 years of it, and the other 5 years on license. It was a 50% off. And
under SDS 40, it would now be 40%. So I mean, it's not a game-changing policy. It's more of a tinker. But I wasn't expecting this recurring theme from every caller. 2 of whom have had experience of actually being punished, one in prison and one in the community. The idea that we simply send too many people to prison.
We do, and some of the prison sentences are ridiculously long. And what you have to do to get out of prison is you have to jump through hoops. I honestly believe, looking back now, the people who should be making the decisions about you getting out are the prison officers, the people you spend day in and day out with, the people who become some type of like weird family.
Giving them a lot of power there.
But I think you need to.
When were you last in jail?
I was released in 2017.
Okay. I think, just possibly before the full impact of Chris Grayling and some other politicians was in place. Yeah. Prison officers tell me that the service is now a shadow of what it used to be in the context of well-paid, experienced officers being sort of squeezed or encouraged out and inexperienced, low-paid people coming in. That's the only reason I question the amount of power we'd be giving those people, that personnel.
Yes, 100%. I got one other thing to say about yourself and about your show.
Uh-oh.
Throughout my time in prison, I had a small DAB radio, and I can promise you now, like, I never missed a show, and it was like a beacon of light that was brought into me. It gave me a sense of like what was going on in the outside world. It made me think that some people do care. And it's really important. And I still make an effort now, even though I have a job and I'm away quite a bit, I still make an effort now of like listening in.
That's
and
incredible.
I think your show is as important as anything. And there's a lot of people in prison that actually listen to LBC. I used to hear it quite a bit.
And so, just for the haters, you haven't offended since you got out.
I haven't.
Mate, that's one of the most amazing things anyone's ever said to me on the show. It really is. Thank you.
Nothing whatsoever.
No, thank you. Seriously. Flipping it. Can we go to the break a bit early? 10:44 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:47 is the time. Anyone else feeling for Ryan's cellmates? I imagine if you hated my guts and you're locked in a cell and I'm on all the time. So Ryan's compliment, which as you could probably tell, got me right in the feels. Notwithstanding, his cellmate might have a case for human rights abuses. I mean, that's Guantanamo level style torture, isn't it? Having me on the radio in a locked room without any... I'm joking. Well, I'm not, but I am. 10:47 is the time. 2 questions. How did we get into such an almighty mess? And, I guess with those words ringing in my ears, the confidence with which I say, most people are good. Most people are persuaded to believe stupid things. Anybody persuaded to believe that what is happening now with regard to our justice system and our prison release is down to the current government has been seduced into a position of stupidity. You weren't born that way, but look at the effort put into making you that way. And that renders the second question particularly pertinent. What else were they supposed to do? Okay, true or false? True or false? Before the election, a week before the general election, so before the Farage riots, before any of the problems that have contributed to but not caused the current crisis in sentencing, a week before the general election, senior police officers wrote to the then Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, warning him that a failure to trigger SDS 40, which is what is essentially being implemented today, but it needs to be triggered weeks in advance, would be exploited by criminals. True or false? In a letter dated June 27, Sir Mark Rowley, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, and 2 other chief constables warned that the overcrowding crisis in prisons a week before the general election was hampering police officers' ability to do their job. True or false? They urged Rishi Sunak to announce the SDS 40 measure immediately because it would take, and I quote, or of course I don't if it's false, many weeks to safely implement. Rishi Sunak will stand up in the House of Commons tomorrow and possibly try to make political capital out of a crisis caused by his deliberate and despicable decision to ignore the advice he was receiving from the most senior police officer in the country and 2 of his colleagues, because, spoiler alert, it's true. The Times has seen the letter. So there it is. A week before the election, when the Farage riots were an unknown, not even a glimmer upon the horizon of our country. A week before the election, Mark Rowley, 2 other chief constables, telling the Prime Minister in terms that if he didn't do what Keir Starmer is doing now, we would have an even worse situation on our hands. And what are the people who stuck up for Rishi Sunak going to do? They're going to start attacking Keir Starmer for doing what Rishi Sunak should have done. And that is why I seem a little bit obsessed sometimes with what I increasingly consider to be truly corrupt reporting. It's either intellectually corrupt, as in, well, why don't we just stick them all on the Bibi Stockholm, or it's morally corrupt, as in, let's not mention the fact that this is all Rishi Sunak's fault. Let's try and turn it into a stick with which to beat Keir Starmer. And it matters. But it doesn't matter as much as it used to, I don't think. And that's why front pageophobia, if Keir Starmer doesn't have it, that could prove to be one of the most significant elements of his premiership. Paul's in Worcester. Paul, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. Always a pleasure to speak to you.
Likewise.
James, I've got to be very careful about what I say because I actually work within the judicial system, within the police as a healthcare professional. I work in custody. So one of my jobs to ensure that people are safe while they're in custody, to make sure they get treated properly and to deal with any medical issues. And I've sat down for many a time with my head in my hands, wondering what the hell is going wrong.
Yeah.
And I think we have to take a much more intelligent approach to it. I think prison is the tip of the iceberg. I actually think we need to look at 2 other things with everybody, whether they're in prison or whether they're on remand. or whether they are on tag or on licence. I think we have to look at two things. One is health. I think a lot of the people I meet do not look after their own physical health.
Yeah.
That's taken out of drugs and other substances, but, just their physical health. We need to empower them to look after that, to understand it. Obviously look after their addictions and mental health, which is another story which you could talk about for hours. And the other thing, a lot of the people that I meet have a reading age below the age of 11.
That's crucial. It's like being in a world where you can't access. You can't even articulate what you want. You can't articulate your feelings. You can't tell people what you need or how you feel, and the frustration is almost unimaginable for the rest of us, Paul.
Absolutely. If we were to do something like anybody who goes into prison and they've been risk assessed appropriately, that, if you can get your functional skills at literacy and numeracy at level 2, we'll give you something back for that, because that's going to empower you to go on and do something in life that you wouldn't get if you didn't have them. I think we need to be a bit kinder. And the other thing we need to think about is something you said earlier. The amount of people that come into contact with the judicial system and are in prison is a minuscule part of society in percentage terms.
Yeah, and yet it punches way above its weight, doesn't it, when it comes to public and media interest?
Absolutely.
On the second question, in the current crisis, what else could they have done? The police were telling Sunak to implement SDS 40 in the moment, in the very specific circumstances we find ourselves in right now. Could the government have done anything differently?
In all honesty, James, I've thought about this and I've given it a lot of thought. And
clearly,
I think they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And no, I think they've made the right decision, albeit a very unpalatable decision.
And it is unpalatable. And that's the second or third time that Starmer has cast himself in the role of doing things that are unpalatable and unpopular, but which he needs to explain. And for you and for me and for many others, he has explained this successfully. It is necessary. Difficult but necessary, as opposed to Rishi Sunak a week before the election, presumably just chucking the letter from the police straight in the shredder and hoping for the best. Thank you, Paul. As you say, always a pleasure. It is 10:54. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the danger of simplistic answers to complicated questions has really seemed more acute. But that front pageophobia thing has picked up, hasn't it? That idea of not governing according to fear of front pages. Dominic Cummings has unexpectedly turned into quite an interesting source of both information and undiluted vitriol. But his accounts of how obsessed Boris Johnson was with what the Daily Mail, where he currently works, and the Daily Telegraph, where he used to work, how they were responding to his every dot and comma in Downing Street is, unless you, like me, have worked in the media or I suppose in politics, it makes no sense whatsoever. Cummings obviously found it enormously frustrating, bless him, that idea that the only thing that matters is the opinion of Paul Dacre or whoever's editing the Daily Mail these days, or the absolute lunatics in charge of the Daily Mail. And yet, that is what informed Johnson and to a lesser extent Truss's madnesses. And Starmer genuinely appears to be pushing it away, genuinely appears to be saying, look, I don't really care. I know I'm going to get a kicking from the Daily Mail for this, but facts are facts. And you cannot get more water into a full pint pot unless you empty out some of the water that's already there. Alan's in Manchester. Alan, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. Well, first thing, I want to agree with Ryan, was it, who served time. I mean, I was a magistrate for 12 years, and the rot really set in when they privatised the probation service. But what I wanted to say to you is Greater Manchester Waste have a facility called the Renew Hub, which is run by Suez, which are a waste disposal company.
Oh, yeah.
And they work with offenders. And the figures are that once they've been there working, and I'll tell you what they do if you want me to do, but the offenders, 70... Well, just say you buy a bike, James, but your old bike is still okay, but you don't want to throw it into the skid.
Oh, I've read about this. Didn't we? I heard this guy being interviewed somewhere. Is it? Did he used to be... He discovered God, didn't he?
I don't know if that's in, but what you do, you take it to the waste and recycling, waste and recycling centre, and you'll put it in you put it in a facility there, and just say, I want to donate that. That will go to the bike kitchen at the Renew Hub in Trafford, and they might put a couple of new tyres on, and just do it up, and then they'll sell it. They can sell it online for about a quarter of the price. Now, in that you've got a furniture place, you've got the bike kitchen, you've got electrical repairs, and the figure is the offenders who go there, 70% of them don't reoffend.
And one of them, if it's the same scheme, one of them retrained as an accountant after benefiting from this scheme, and I think he may have gone back to work in the charity as an accountant. And when the founder of it was reminded of this on another radio program that I was listening to, and I think that the young man who had spent his whole life in and out of custody and in and out of trouble had completely turned his life around and retrained as an accountant. He started crying.
Recycling lives, James.
I think that's the fella. If it's not the fella, then it's someone doing exactly the same thing in a different sector. Why then is there so much resistance? And again, I wonder increasingly how much resistance there actually is. We're back to front pageophobia. Oh, it's a holiday camp. It's like Butlins. And, I presented a different type of radio show. I'm sure I could find someone to tell me that going to prison is like going to Magaluf for a fortnight. And they might be idiots and they might be horribly wrong, but it gathers a sort of momentum, or it becomes a popular figure of speech. Where does the resistance come from to the idea that most or many people being imprisoned could actually be helped instead? Or even if they've been imprisoned, we could minimise the likelihood of them returning to prison by changing the way we treat them completely.
Well, probably from the usual suspects. But, as a magistrate, James, I went in a woman's prison at Style, and I went in a man's prison at Forest Bank in Manchester. They are horrible places.
Yeah, I know.
They are horrible. And, and the other thing is, a percentage of those people in there will be drug offenders. And it's interesting to see the work Portugal did when they didn't. I don't think they decriminalised drugs, but they made it into a health problem. But crime went down. A load of drug dealers, basically were left unemployed. But your time as a magistrate, and any magistrate will tell you see the same people again and again and again. And it costs something like, when I was sitting on the bench, James, it was £48,000 to £50,000 a year to incarcerate somebody.
Could send them to Eton for that. Before they added VAT.
No, they produced Boris Johnson and the other clowns. But as James Timson, I think it was a masterstroke by Starmer.
I do too. Although some of the people in the sector are a little bit unimpressed with it, with the sense that it's a little bit gimmicky. But it's far too early to sit in judgment on that. He's proved himself in the context of rehabilitating prisoners. That's his world, and he has proved himself there. So you hope that kind of scheme, and the scheme you mentioned, becomes almost government policy as opposed to exceptional, charitable or commercial policy.
Yeah.
Pretty straightforward, actually, when you think of it like that. What an amazing hour. Thank you, Alan. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. This is nice from Paul in Sutton. James, you sneering Jekyll. How can you support pensioners freezing to death? LBC really is a joke of a station. Thanks for getting in touch, Paul. Did you know not only will the pension increase for everybody this year be in excess of the winter fuel payment that some pensioners are set to lose, but the 880,000 pensioners who are eligible for pension credits but not currently claiming them won't just get the £300 winter fuel payment as a consequence of signing up to a scheme that the government is now paying for adverts to encourage them to do. They'll actually be another £4,000 potentially better off every single year. So there you go, Paul.
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 11 is the time. So on a similar theme, and I'm as surprised by some of this as you are. The question of how our time together would change given the arrival of a new government is it's a very organic process, isn't it? It's a very ongoing process, but there is a recurring theme. I think you're going to hear the phrase that we just invented, front pageophobia. I think you're going to hear that quite a lot more moving forward. And And I will, yes, Kate in Devon, I will put some flesh on the bones of those figures that I shared just before the news shortly. But I want to talk about something else. It speaks to a similar theme, but by no means identical. Keir Starmer is about to give a speech. In fact, I think he's giving it now at the TUC, at the Trades Union Congress. It's the first speech, of course, by a Prime Minister at the Trades Union Congress, which represents millions of British workers. So I'll leave you to work out why a Prime Minister would want to avoid such a forum. The first speech by a Prime Minister to the TUC in 15 years. There will be a promise to remove the legislation the Conservatives introduced to deprive workers of the only real recourse to leverage that they have in the workplace, i.e. the right to strike. But crucially, he will announce an end to what he will call the cheap and vindictive attacks by central government on the trade union movement. And I find this enduringly fascinating. I'm of an age and a class where my relationship with trade unions is almost entirely rhetorical. I have never had recourse to call upon the services of the National Union of Journalists. In fact, at this point in time, I couldn't tell you for certain whether I was a member of it or not. But my dad was, and my dad was a member of the National Union of Journalists throughout the period that he reported for a quite an anti-trade union newspaper, a national newspaper journalist up to about 1990. It was not unhinged. He worked for the Daily Telegraph, and it was a paper of record under the editorship of Bill Pease and others. It was an extraordinary newspaper, which covered events all around the world. And yet my dad was a union member, even as he would be covering industrial unrest that was very much to the national detriment. I'm thinking chiefly of Longbridge, the car industry, British Leyland in Birmingham, and subsequently the miners' strike, both of which he covered, and both of which I think could be persuasively portrayed as examples of trade union excess that ended up being very much to the detriment of their members. I don't offer that up as a 100% guaranteed analysis of history, but it was certainly nuanced. It was certainly it's certainly arguable, and I probably would argue that Arthur Scargill's stewardship of the NUM and the absence of secret ballots and the failure to understand that Margaret Thatcher was quite prepared to see the coal industry, the mining industry in this country disappear pretty much entirely was an unintentional betrayal of the membership. And with the car industry, with British Leyland and other areas of industrial action. So I grew up seeing them reported by my own father as essentially a bad thing. And yet he was always a member of a trade union. And I mention that because both things can be true at the same time. Trade union membership can be a general good for workers. Trade unions can be a general force for good. But like anything of human construction or anything populated by human beings, they can be bad as well. They can be bad as well. And it's the absence of nuance in the intervening years that fascinates me. It's the success of the vindictive and cheap attacks on unions that I find most fascinating. And that's what I'd like to talk about now. I'd like to hear, well, two things really. The first is why it worked. Why was it so effective? And that's where we're in recurring theme territory. You know, it's a bit like asking, how can significant swathes of the population have been persuaded that being sent to prison is like going to Butlins for a fortnight? And the answer in some ways will be similar. But I want the detail of how it worked, because although the central theme may be similar, the actual tactics will be slightly different, or the language used or the leverage deployed will be slightly different. So, and hey, listen, absolutely welcome to call in if you think that I'm inhabiting some sort of undergraduate stroke mythical or fantastical dreamland with a completely rose-tinted understanding of the trade union movement that you will be able to completely remedy, completely re-educate me. But that's what I want to know. I want to know why the cheap and vindictive attacks on trade unions have been so effective over the course of my lifetime. Over the course of my lifetime. I was thinking of the ragged-trousered philanthropist then. I was desperately trying to reach for a literary reference. Reading the ragged-trousered philanthropists informs my opinion of trade unions, as indeed it was intended to do when it was written. But that might just make me a sort of literary romantic rather than a resident of reality. And if you think that, then tell me. And then the other element of this is what have the trade unions ever done for you? So some of the answers to that are national. They're sort of universal. They would include minimum wage legislation. It would include holidays. I mean, if you imagine what working life was like before the trade union movement, then you don't have to rewind too far to be watching children being sent up chimneys or people losing limbs while working in factories and having no recourse but begging to keep their tummies half full. The idea that trade unions are a force for bad is probably the greatest achievement of if you want to get all Marxist about it, probably the greatest achievement of wealth over the last 150 years in this, no, because it hasn't been around that. So let's say over the last 50 years in this country, the greatest achievement of wealth, as in the organs of influence that seek to protect and promote those with all the money over those who do all the work, has probably been the greatest triumph of the last 50 years. So just some sort of, not quite off the top of my head, but by no means a comprehensive list. What have the trade unions ever done for you? How much do you enjoy your 2-day weekend? If you, of course, have one. You are capable these days of working at weekends, having a day off in the week, or voluntarily putting a shift on a Saturday or a Sunday. Up until the sort of late 19th century in this country, factories were open 6 days a week. So you got Sunday off as a day of rest. And much of the population was still so in hock to the church that you spent much of that listening to a priest or a vicar. So you got your 2-day weekend. How many hours a day do you think was the average working week before the trade unions came along? Smack in the middle of the Industrial Revolution, when the fortunes that still exist today and the stately homes that weren't built on the back of slavery were built on the back of the Industrial Revolution, and a lot of those fortunes remain in place today. What do you think the working week was before? It is about 150 years, or 125 years. What do you think the working week was, on average, before trade unions started campaigning, before trade unions started finding their feet? Go on, have a guess. 62 hours. Up to a 16-hour day. Late 19th century when the trade unions started working on that. It was in Beckton, anyone listening in Beckton, in 1884, where gas workers went on strike to oppose an increase in their hours. So that's what they did for you. Minimum wage. I don't know how many times you've heard people essentially, whether they say it out loud or not, essentially argue that if you want rich people to work harder, you've got to pay them more. You've got to give bankers 7-8 figure bonuses. Otherwise they'll just go somewhere else. I've got to give back. You want poor people to work harder, you've got to pay them less. That's the only language they understand. You've got to crack the whip. You've got to do it. There was no minimum wage legislation until trade unions got involved. And that didn't kick in, of course, until 1998, the second year of the last Labour government. So the relationship between Labour politicians and trade unions brought you the minimum wage within your own living memory, within your own working life, within your own lifetime. Equal pay for women, still, I would argue, a battlefront that is open. I don't think that battle is particularly over. But again, you go back to 1888, a meeting of the TUC, the same conference to which Keir Starmer is speaking today, in 1888, introduced a motion for equal pay for equal work for women, long before they got the vote. And following on from there, that the improvements in that area have been achieved. Parental leave, wouldn't have that without the trade unions. In fact, it wasn't until 1998 that parental leave in its current form was established, and paid paternity leave didn't kick in until 2003. I could go on. I won't, because these are the broader, bigger wins, victories for the workers as opposed to the owners. It's a better word than wealth, isn't it? The owners. So, if you're a bit older than me, and that's a phrase I'm going to have to start using a little bit less as we move forward, because I think I've crossed that Rubicon of feeling like a relatively young observer of social change. But if you've got a broader perspective than mine, perhaps, why has it been so effective, given that the wins secured for the population, for the working population? So you don't have to be, that's the point, remember, you don't have to be a trade union member to benefit from minimum wage legislation. You don't have to be a trade union member to benefit from 2-day weekends. You don't have to be a trade union member to benefit from pay equality. You don't have to be a trade union member to benefit from limits on working hours. Changes to the law benefit us all. Arguably, the people who aren't paying subs to a trade union get the best deal of all, because they get a lot of the wins without any of the expenditures. So given just that short list of obvious improvements to our lives secured by trade unions, why have these vindictive and cheap attacks on unions been so effective and so prevalent over the last 50 years? And that figure may be wrong, but it's the one that I've reached for. Why is it? How has it worked so well? So what did the unions ever do for you? And why has the demonization by the owning classes of the only organizations to stand up for workers' rights over the last 150 years, why has it? Here's the thing I really want, okay? If you feel the scales falling from your eyes right now, or your ears, you're sort of thinking, flipping out, I'd never thought of it like that. I thought I hated unions. Because, I don't know, Richard Littlejohn told me to. I thought I hated unions. But he's right, isn't he? I don't. How did it work on you? How did you end up thinking that you hated something that has historically improved your life immeasurably? Unless, and I fully accept the possibility of your existence, unless you hate 2-day weekends, unless you hate equal pay, unless you hate holidays, unless you hate parental leave, unless you hate all of those things. But if you don't, how on earth did you end up thinking that unions were your enemy? How has the vindictive and cheap attack, repeated vindictive and cheap attacks on trade unions, how have they been so successful? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need to answer both or either of those questions.
James O'Brien on LBC.
20 minutes after 11, we'll get stuck into the trade union conversation imminently, but the statistic or the headline about being able to boost your income if you are a particularly low-income pensioner by nearly £4,000 is, I mean, you can find it in the Daily Express, but the best place to go is probably money-saving expert. Martin Lewis has been banging on about this for years. It's an extraordinarily underclaimed benefit. So people worried that they're not going to be able to absorb the winter fuel payment cut, even as we discover that the triple lock pension payment is going to see a big boost on the state pension this year. The people most worried about it will be the people who are actually eligible for pension credits and are not claiming them. And when they do claim them, they could become eligible for up to £4,000 increase in their annual income. So don't be shy and don't be proud about this. I used to drive me nuts when people would ring in thinking that there was something wrong with claiming. This is what you've worked all your life. You've paid into this pot. It's your money. And I'm paying into it now to make sure that you're going to be okay. So claim it. It can be quite a complicated process, obviously, because it's got to guard against fraud and malfeasance. But just Google it if you want, or I'll try and put a link up a little bit later. But there it is. Not only does the triple lock kick in later this year, which will see every pension in the country boosted, but you have, for 880,000 people eligible for pension credit and not currently claiming, you have, up to £4,000 a year waiting for you as well. So that vote tomorrow is going to be interesting. That vote later today, I'm afraid, is going to be interesting. 21 minutes after 11. Why have decades of vindictive and cheap attacks on unions proved so successful? And what have the unions ever done for you? Laura is in Romford. Laura, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Thanks for speaking to me. It's actually my birthday, so this is a treat for me.
Happy birthday! Unfortunately, only Nick Abbott is allowed to play a little happy birthday jingle at this moment. It's a law. It's one of the first things that we're instructed when we accept a job at LBC. And I've broken that in the past, and the trouble I got into. So all I'm allowed to do is just wish you a very, very happy birthday, Laura.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
So I phoned really to say what the unions had done for me, but in terms of your question as to why it's been so successful, I think, and I was saying to your producer, I think the print media have got a lot to answer for in this, and I wonder if in going forward it won't be so successful because those red top newspapers are not going to have the power that they've had previously. And of course,
what's his chops? Rupert Murdoch needed to demonise the unions in order to get his own changes through, and there were excesses, there were misuses in the print industry, but you couldn't have done what he did unless you'd somehow seeded the thoughts, along with Margaret Thatcher, that unions were an enemy of the people that they represented.
Yeah, but in terms of me personally, I'm a teacher. I've been in a teaching union. Always, I come from quite a different background to you in terms of attitudes to unions. My dad was a big union guy where he worked, and I'd always been in a union. But I'd been teaching for about 10 years when I became chronically ill. I've got a blood disorder. I also developed lupus, and the school I was in were trying to push me out in underhand ways, putting me on performance improvement plans and things that they really shouldn't have been doing, especially to someone with a chronic illness.
Yeah.
And that was when my union stepped in, and it wasn't just the support that they gave me to mean that I got a financial settlement, which obviously was very welcome, but it was the emotional support as well, from my rep in school to offering me counselling through the union, and that's what unions have done for me. I couldn't have done it without them. I would have been a wreck.
And you remind us that the representation of trade unions in many ways is as valuable in the public sector as in the private sector. In fact, it's more pertinent now in the public sector because the private sector, thanks to legislation beginning with Margaret Thatcher and then moving forward from there, has been able to essentially shut trade unions out of the room.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So that's why it is, teachers, the areas, the sections of society that still have the right to strike are more likely to be in the public sector than the private sector.
Yeah, certainly. My friends in the private sector, most of them are not in unions. They don't have the right to be in unions. So it's something important.
Do you think there's a weird... I always remember, I've mentioned this a few times, Laura, I used to do the paper reviews on the telly, and I used to look at people sometimes who I knew, socially, and we'd go out for dinner together, and then when you found yourselves on opposite sides of these political discussions, I found it hard ever to see them in quite the same light again. And I always remember one of them going on about, it was pensions actually, and how the private sector pension had been decimated over years, and therefore the public sector didn't deserve good pensions. And it struck me that was a bit like arguing that because you got mugged last night, you wouldn't be happy unless I got mugged tomorrow. And I wonder whether it's the same with unions sometimes, whether people who've had their rights eroded become resentful of people who haven't.
Yeah, I think there is something in that, and I've witnessed that, particularly when we've gone on strike and we've gone on marches and things like that. People can be really snidey.
Snidey, yeah. And of course, they're the people that probably most need reminding that victories in the big picture, that's why the TUC conference today is important, victories in the big picture, the big theatre victories actually affect everybody. Things like parental leave and minimum wage legislation and working hours and all those sort of things. They are victories won by the trade union movement for all the workers. But no doubt Rishi Sunak will be standing up tomorrow to claim that train drivers are obscenely overpaid. Brendan's in St Helens. Brendan, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello,
How are you
Brendan.
doing?
Very well, mate. What's on your mind?
I I tried to get on to the conversation I had a few weeks ago at trade unions, where I rang at 5 to 12 and you were knocking off at 12, as it were. But
hang on a minute, how dare you? I work until at least 1 o'clock every day, knocking off at 12. That was without trade union intervention as well. I negotiated that myself. Sorry, carry on, Brendan.
Yeah, it's I come from a quite left-wing trade union family, but very pragmatic. I'd like to tell you a couple of little, small, short stories, hopefully paint the picture of the benefit of being in a trade union for not only the member, but also families and other people who probably don't realise that they're actually protected by the laws that are implemented because of in a union. My late father, Vinty Cassin, worked for Beecham's in St Helens, SmithKline Beecham, now GlaxoSmithKline. You all know the company.
Yes.
One of the earliest pharmaceutical factories in the world. He was 21 in 1957 and put his hand in a mixing machine to take a sample, to take it off to the lab to be analysed, and he pulled his fingers off. There was no guard on the machine. Imagine a massive big drum, like 12 foot across, with a paddle going round. Pulled his fingers off. Long story short, stitched his fingers up, and he was offered £250 compensation. Now, that was £10 a week, roughly, 1957. Yeah. And his older brother-in-law was a stonemason who was in the stonemasons union working on the Anglican Cathedral in Liverpool.
I'm going to. Do you know, Brendan? Do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to tell you to slow down a bit because I want to savour this story. I can already tell it's. I can already tell it's a good one.
I've told this story, James, a million times, and it makes me so proud to actually.
I can tell.
To articulate.
And take your
my
time.
dad's
Seriously,
life through this story. I will slow down because I do talk too fast. Everybody knows. So, my dad's brother-in-law said, "Listen, Vinty, you're going to need that hand the rest of your life, mate." He just had my oldest sister Colette. There's 5 of us. I'm the baby at 51. Yeah. 5 kids, council house background, etc., etc. Poor family, but hard working. Dad lost his hand, and his brother-in-law said, "Right, I'm going to speak to the stonemasons union rep and say, look, we need to fight for you." Got him signed up, and on the steps of the court in Liverpool, he got a tap on the shoulder, and they paid out £2,500. 10 times. Yeah. That was a lot of money in 1957. So my dad always says that we wouldn't have had a 3-bed semi-detached house in St Helens. We wouldn't have all gone off to university and got degrees and master's degrees because we were all clever brothers because of my mum and dad's genes, but didn't have good starts in life. And this all goes back to, I always think it sounds like I'm a raving loony lefty. But my dad always fought for justice within society. From that, he set up the trade union in Beecham's. He was branch secretary for the GMWU, as it was then, went to the GMB. 18 years, and he fought everybody's cases. But he wasn't. He always said to me, and brought us all up the same, that on your show, you've talked so much about obviously about the last few years about power and how power influences people's thoughts. You can't change, going back to Keir Starmer now, you can't change anything unless you're in power. And it's having that power and using it pragmatically to influence things. So we set the union up, and his proudest moment, and this is going back to, we're joining quite a few different strands here about the print media. 1974, my dad was fighting for equal pay for the women in the factory who were on the packing line. So they were on loads less money than the guys who were working.
Yeah, it still goes on, doesn't it? There's still cases like that.
On the same grade. Long story short, 74 equal pay acts for women. My dad basically put a padlock on the gates of the factory and closed the factory down. And there's a photograph in the local press. This is how salacious it was in the 70s, with my dad at the front with his cap on, and he didn't want to be there, surrounded by women, and the headline of the local paper was "Vinty Cassin, ladies' man." They wanted to make it into something salacious to basically denigrate the power of the unions. Anyway, to the fighting within the union, with the factory, within the company, that they got equal pay for women, and that's still there within Beecham's to this day.
That's incredible.
So my point is that is a positive power of someone who had an injury. Health and safety law came in, stopped the people getting hurt, got equal pay. What's not to like about unions? And when people say to me, "Oh, they get train drivers get this and train drivers get that," are you in a union? No. When you need a union, they're there for you. Have you got car insurance?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, so you pay a subscription, yes, and it pays out when you pay into it, yes. So don't crash your car into a lamppost and then ring up the insurance and say, can I claim when you've not paid your subs?
So it's a really good analogy.
To bring a few things together there.
Mate, you're a natural. And it's true, but also with that added side order, which I think hit me hardest today, of the benefits extending way beyond the membership. So, the big wins for the working person in this country have been universal wins, not confined, won by trade unions, but not confined to trade union members.
Correct. Health and safety law. People say, red tape, you need to legislation.
Yeah.
They are basic human rights that someone should have. You go to work, you come home, you see your family, you see your kids, and you don't get injured. That day my dad went to work, he lost his hand, and it affected him for the rest of his life, and he thought, I'm going to do something about it.
He did.
And we're lucky in a Western democracy where we've got health and safety law, which should protect people.
Unbelievable.
But we all should chip in and put a couple of quid in the pot.
Beautifully put, Brendan. Beautifully put. And I was on the bus yesterday, going past a building site near where I live, and I don't know why, it just hit me more than it usually does. The sign on the front gate of all the PPE that they need to go through the gate, the boots, the helmet, the high-vis jackets, it's like all with little graphics on it. And I just thought, that's a law because the people who look after the workers wanted it to be the law. It's not a law because the people who look after the owners wanted it to be the law. And of course, given that we're still in the shadow of the Grenfell Tower inquiry, I just found that quite a poignant moment, just looking at what Brendan rightly describes as health and safety legislation, although David Cameron would prefer to call it red tape, and that's not fair. All the Tories would prefer to call it red tape, certainly all the Brexiters prefer to call it red tape. Some of them, of course, even take the mickey out of the phrase health and safety itself. Some Daily Mail columnists thought that was a hilarious thing to do. And there it is, right there. Even for people who can't read. It's there in graphic form, all the things you need. The steel toe cap boots, the hard hat, the high-vis jacket and the rest of it, the special gloves. Because otherwise, as Brendan's dad could tell you, many, many more people would get hurt. It's 11:33. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 11:37. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we will probably return shortly to the conversation about trade unions, but there are rather important events unfolding elsewhere as well. You will be aware, I suspect, of a lot of coverage regarding Lucy Letby, the nurse convicted of multiple murders, and a lot of people suggesting that the safety of those convictions may need to be called into question. You may not be aware that the Thirlwall inquiry began today, and that is an inquiry designed to examine how Lucy Letby was able to attack babies on the Countess and Chester Hospital's neonatal unit in 2015 and 2016. Of course, the danger is on the first day of the inquiry that these two very different narratives will collide. And I think that might be what's happened. Chris Chambers, LBC's Northwest correspondent, is at the inquiry for LBC, and he joins me now. Chris, what can you tell us?
Morning, James. The purpose of this inquiry, as you just mentioned, is to look at three key areas. Firstly, the experiences of the parents of Lucy Letby's victims. Secondly, the conduct of those working at the Countess of Chester Hospital and how Lucy Letby was able to carry out her killing spree. And then thirdly, a focus on the wider NHS, the culture within hospitals, and how these affect the safety of newborns in neonatal units. We did hear right at the start that this is not going to be a revisitation of the evidence and of the trial, of course. The hearing here at Liverpool Town Hall opened with some words from Lady Justice Thirlwell, who's chairing this inquiry. She said at the heart of this inquiry are the babies who died, who were injured, and their parents as well. She said that each parent celebrated the birth of their children. Then when things seemed to be going well, each one of them collapsed suddenly and unexpectedly. They were told natural causes were the reason for the death or lifelong difficulties they faced. But then in 2018, they learned they may have been deliberately harmed and that a nurse had been arrested and ultimately charged with murder. She also referenced the growing number of people questioning Lucy Letby's guilty conviction.
In the months since the Court of Appeal handed down its judgment, there has been a huge outpouring of comment from a variety of quarters on the validity of the convictions. So far as I'm aware, It has come entirely from people who were not at the trial. Parts of the evidence have been selected and criticised, as has the conduct of the defence at trial, about which those defence lawyers can say nothing. All of this noise has caused enormous additional distress to the parents who have already suffered far too much.
We've also been hearing, James, from King's Counsel, Rachel Langdale, about the purpose of this inquiry, and she explained that one aspect of the evidence will look at what the families were told or not told by the Countess of Chester Hospital, what info they were given by the hospital, and also was the hospital candid with the parents, and if not, why not? Was there a cover-up? If so, why? And was it more important to protect the reputation of the hospital? And then she went on to explain that this was a place where parents expected their babies to be safe. This is what she had to say.
The hospital's neonatal unit should be a place where babies are cared for by doctors and nurses, where newborns are protected and nurtured. At the Countess of Chester between June 2015 and June 2016, the neonatal unit was a place where babies were murdered and injured by someone entrusted to care for them.
Well, she went on to say we will examine the conduct of those working at the hospital, including the board, managers, doctors and nurses, and to find out could Lucy Letby's crimes have been prevented. This inquiry will run until the middle of December, and Lady Thirlwell says she expects her report to be released in the autumn of next year.
11:41 is the time. Chris, I have to tell you that I had a few questions that I was planning to ask you at the end of your package. And you've answered every single one of them in the course of your package. I'm not sure that's ever happened to me before on the radio. So it's a testament to your professionalism.
Fantastic stuff, James. Thank you very much.
I see. Well, we'll talk again. We'll catch up again. But seriously, I was ticking them off as he went through that. Really first-class piece of reporting. A pleasure to have you on the programme. We should do that more often. Chris Chambers there, LBC's Northwest correspondent, who, as you heard, is at the Thirlwell inquiry into the Lucy Letby, the crimes committed by Lucy Letby. And I'm being so loud is some of the querying and questioning around that conviction that you almost add the crimes committed by Lucy Letby as things stand. But my goodness me, what a timely reminder of what on earth the parents, the poor parents of these babies will be going through as the clamour surrounding the convictions grows. 11:42 is the time. Back to the trade unions and the question of A, why the cheap and vindictive attacks over the last 50 years have been so successful, and B, what they do for you. And on both of those questions, actually, I'll read you this quickly from Ian. Morning, James. I've been self-employed even for 40 years. I've always and I have struggled over that time. I'm okay now, but I always used to resent unions because they weren't available for me. If I'm honest, it was born out of jealousy of the benefits that employed people were getting. It never occurred to me that the benefits my employed family members were getting were down to the same unions that I hated. That was a real light bulb moment for me. Me too, actually, today. Ben's in Tamworth. Ben, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. It's a pleasure to speak to you again. I was at your show in Wolverhampton earlier this year with Aisha Hazarika. I thought you were both absolutely brilliant. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
On this subject, the best thing I ever did was get my wife into a union. My wife's profoundly deaf and a highly skilled, highly qualified makeup artist. And in her job, in the place where she was working, she was very much overlooked and pushed into a corner and not utilised correctly. And on top of that, she had a number of instances. For example, if there was a fire alarm went off, and she had no idea that the fire alarm was going off because they hadn't given her the correct alerter to tell her that. So the fire alarm's going off, people are being told to evacuate the building, she's looking around going, what's going on, what's happening, until the security guard came over to her, quite rudely shouted at her, you need to get out the building, and she had no idea what was going on.
Wow.
Along with that, there was other instances where there'd be staff meetings or presentations, and she'd be sat there with no interpreter, no one to explain what was being said or what was going on, and there was no motivation to make sure she understood these things. It got her really down, and she'd be coming home from work every day miserable, and it got to a point where I'd be waiting for her to come home, and I'd be thinking, oh, what's gone wrong today?
Yes.
Eventually we signed her up to us door, And it was the best thing ever, because straight away the union representative, we told her exactly what had gone on and what had happened. And I don't want to use the wrong language or anything, but she was like a terrier. She was like a terrier. She went straight in there. They had a 3-hour meeting with management, and all of a sudden my wife got the fire alarm alerter. All of a sudden there was someone to take notes for her and help her out in meetings and presentations and all this sort of thing. And it was like night and day. Before union representation, she could be pushed into the corner and, in my opinion, treated without the respect that she deserved. As soon as we got that representation, all of a sudden, everything that was required for her to be able to do her job to the best of her ability became available.
That's beautifully put and neatly concluded as well. Briefly, why do you think if you must have friends, maybe family members who have subscribed to the school of thought that sees unions as their enemy. Why do you think these attacks that Starmer will describe today as vindictive and cheap have, over the course of our lifetime, Ben, been so successful?
Well, it's still a little bit of a mystery to me, but many years ago I was a firefighter and I was a member of the Fire Brigades Union. Yeah. Now, whilst there, I heard loads of rumblings and grumblings around the mess table about, the union's pointless, it's teethless, it's in bed with the higher ups, and all this sort of thing. Now, again, I think one of your previous callers alluded to this. I never needed the union. I was a young, fit, able-bodied person, bit naive. I mean, looking back at it, how successful the union was for my wife, I had quite a bad time, ride of it when I first joined station. I had bad management, to say the least. And I think there could be an argument to say that I was actually bullied in certain cases. Yes. Now, if I'd have known how strong unions were back then, I think I would have stood up to my bosses a bit more.
That's interesting.
But this is going off on a bit of a tangent.
Not really.
But because I didn't do that, my opinion was generally, unions are a bit toothless and blah, blah, blah. So when things like this pop up in the media, unions are bad and whatever, I can understand why people get absorbed in it. But it's so obvious. The reason why bosses and the higher-ups hate unions is because they work, man. They damn well work.
I think that's probably the most straightforward and irrefutable answer of them all. Why do they hate them so much? Because they work. How do you end up persuading people that they don't work or that they are their enemy? That's probably the more complicated question. It's 11:47.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10 to 12, you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Noga Polski is the freelance journalist in Jerusalem to whom we turn increasingly frequently for clarity and information on the various developing stories out there. We should begin with the most urgent and most important, Noga, which is the overnight Israeli strikes on a humanitarian zone in Gaza. As ever, conflicting accounts from either side of the scale of the damage, the success, in quotes, of the alleged targeting of senior Hamas terrorists, a claim Hamas denies. What can you tell us? What do we know for sure?
Well, we know very little for sure. We know that 3 Hamas commanders were targeted. We know that the health authorities, the Hamas authorities in Gaza, say that 40 people were killed and that the Israeli army disputes that. We also have today, interestingly, the Israeli Minister of Defense saying in an absolutely, unequivocal way that the Hamas's military apparatus is gone. And so what we're seeing from Hamas, what's left of it, are kind of guerrilla operations now.
As in what they're doing?
Yes.
And
well, there have been rocket sirens, I should have mentioned. Sure. On the Israeli side, there have been rocket sirens as well.
And to clarify, whether or not Hamas commanders were targeted or indeed killed, it was a humanitarian zone that was attacked.
As far as I know, yes, although not one of the, for example, humanitarian zones where the polio vaccines are being distributed. A humanitarian zone where people were told to shelter previously when they've been made to leave other areas.
And then we come to the two other stories that sit alongside each other, I think, in some ways, both involving filmed footage, actually. Tell us first about Benjamin Netanyahu's failed attempt to stop, and quite how, I think you made this point on your Twitter account, quite how a court in Israel could prevent a film festival in Canada from showing a film. I need a PhD in jurisprudence to understand, but Benjamin Netanyahu nonetheless tried to ban the screening of a documentary in Toronto last night. What was he so cross about?
Well, I don't know. I have to tell you, in hindsight, I've actually asked myself whether he didn't... what he did, let's just tell the audience, is yesterday, which is the very day that the Toronto Film Festival was scheduled to screen a work in progress called the BB Files, which is the first time people get to see videotapes of Mr. and Mrs. Netanyahu and their son under police interrogation. And this has been known for a while. The Toronto Film Festival announced it 10 days ago. So one of the questions that the court had before throwing this out summarily was saying, why did you wait till the last day? And I now wonder whether he didn't do it to actually get some attention the way he likes to do, knowing that, of course, there's no Jerusalem court that has jurisdiction in Toronto.
And I suspect the attention that he's attracted as a consequence of footage of him speaking to the family of a murdered hostage is not the sort of attention that he would have sought to receive.
No, and it's really, really interesting. You're right. These two videos, kind of video incidents, let's say, in one day. And it's possible that Netanyahu was concerned that Israelis or other people seeing him being rude and arrogant and dismissive and seeing his family members actually have temper tantrums and threaten police officers wouldn't be great. But this is nothing compared to video and audio that has come out of an absolutely miserable encounter. The Netanyahu couple, Mr. and Mrs. Netanyahu, went on Friday to the home of a poor family whose son is one of the 6 hostages murdered by Hamas last week. And it seems that their very decision to go there is based on, I don't want to say bigotry, James, but certainly stereotypical thinking. This is a Sephardic Jewish family, very religious, not wealthy, living in a kind of outer suburb of Jerusalem. The dad, a rabbi, very modest people. And it turns out not at all modest intellectually or in terms of their spirit. And Netanyahu considers in the stereotype these kind of people his supporters. So he showed up and he got the shock of his life with this, especially the mother. First of all, if you hear on my Twitter, you can hear some audio from this encounter. And the background noise, it sounds almost like a waterfall, is just the mother sobbing.
It's unbearable.
Isn't it? Isn't it so painful? And then you hear the dad basically barely letting the prime minister get a word in edgewise. And this father has become kind of the mouthpiece for almost every Israeli citizen. This has been replayed constantly. Whatever was shown in Toronto has been forgotten. And this modest gentleman, a rabbi with his hair covered, saying to Netanyahu, we've listened to you for 15 years and you've done nothing. You've said nothing. My son, he said, my son was murdered in a tunnel you built, which is putting very starkly what every Israeli knows, which is that the Netanyahu doctrine was to fund Hamas as a way of diminishing the importance and the ability to act of the Palestinian Authority. Hamas is a terror group, and this was an extremely controversial policy throughout in Israel. The Israeli intelligence authorities opposed it all along, and Netanyahu dismissed them. And this father, using very stark language, said, basically, we're sick of you. And he said, you've been there 15 years. You've been in power so long. You've done nothing. It's been very powerful.
And that so sort of de facto sponsorship of Hamas by Netanyahu is still criminally underreported in this country. So that phrase, "you built the tunnels" or "you gave them swords," although I don't think this particular story has been even reported in the UK yet. It will be quite well. I can't find a reference to it. I'm looking at the Times of Israel copy before speaking to you, but it will be difficult for some people in this country to fully process. What was Netanyahu's response? What was his both his manner and his substance in response to this?
Those are very good questions. So first, just to fill in, your audience, Netanyahu has been looking for most of his career, certainly for the last 15 years, for a way to try and prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. And the internationally recognized Palestinian Authority, which is a secular government, which is very problematic, but nonetheless a stable governing authority and not a terror group, Netanyahu saw them as the principal challenge to his hope never to allow a Palestinian state to emerge. As a result, he decided to boost in many ways this terror group that is the principal rival within Palestine, the principal rival of the Palestinian Authority. And this, as I said, this has always been viewed very dimly by all of the military and security authorities here. But, your average Israeli goes to work, goes to school, tries to make it to the end of the month, and doesn't really have the bandwidth to, what did you just say? To get a PhD in studying whether or not Hamas and the authority and this and the other. I mean, you can't expect that from normal citizens. And so people just kind of shuffled along. And what this father said very starkly was, you armed them with swords, you armed them with dollars, and my son was murdered in a tunnel you built. He didn't even include Hamas. He didn't even mention them. And this has it's just captured Israelis. And all day long, you've heard other news programs here saying, finally somebody said it. And that has brought up another issue, which is Netanyahu has almost not met, of the 1,200 people murdered on October 7th, and of the 700 soldiers killed since, and of the hostages who've been killed since, Netanyahu has almost not met any of these families. And that really highlighted why he may have chosen this family, and therefore what were his stereotypical expectations of them.
Good Lord.
Yeah, it doesn't look good for him.
I sense, and I guess we've all been wrong in the past, but you feel that this episode may reach parts that previous episodes / scandals have not reached.
Because this father spoke so clearly and so, indisputably honestly, he just spoke from his heart. And because he, at one point, you asked how Netanyahu answered him. He said, you haven't done anything in 15 years. And Netanyahu responds very haughtily. Netanyahu responds by saying, well, I'm not going to tell you what I've been through behind closed doors. And then Mrs. Netanyahu pipes up and says, yes, you all alone. And it's like a pity party for the Netanyahu.
Won't somebody remember the real victims here?
Yeah. And then Mr. Netanyahu says, yes, alone in front of and he lists all these people he feels he's had to fight off. The President of the United States, the army brass here, people here who don't understand. And they're sitting there at the house of these parents mourning their child. And they're having a pity party. And the father laughs a really bitter laugh out loud, and he says, we've been listening to you for 15 years and you've done nothing. And then he said something even worse to Netanyahu. He says, he said, I've been brought to the point where the fact that I was able to bury my son in the holy city, his body whole, is a miracle. And then he repeats it, burying my son whole, I'm forced to see this as a miracle? What depths have you brought us to, sir? He says to Netanyahu. Yeah, and Netanyahu kind of shuts up at that point.
Perhaps an unfamiliar feeling of shame, perhaps. Noga Tarnopolsky, thank you for that. I've retweeted a couple of those clips, although I should stress that they'll be subtitled. You won't be able, well, most of us won't be able to understand what is being said. But I think that the keening, the weeping of the mother is, well, I'm afraid that's a universal language, and one which, of course, as some of you are reminding me to point out, one that the parents of dead children and dead people in Gaza will also be fluent in as well. The universal language of misery and lost love. It's 12:02.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:06. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we turn our attention next to a completely different story. And do you know, I'm usually fairly clear on how I'm going to approach something with you. Not like crystal clear. I'd like to say that when the light comes on, I don't know what I'm going to say, but I've got a vague idea where I'm going to go, or at least what windmills I want to tilt at, or what areas of my own ignorance I want you to address. I want you to help with. This is really broad, actually. It is World Afro Day, a campaign urging MPs to update the Equality Act to make Afro hair a protected characteristic. And I think for a lot of white people, and for the avoidance of doubt, I am a white person, although occasionally bright pink, actually. But the failure to understand this is not something that you need to feel guilty about, as long as you're prepared to make the effort to cease your failure to understand it. In other words, to understand it. I didn't used to get it. I didn't used to understand why it was such a fraught and emotional political issue. And the reason for that is, for white people, it never is. For white people, your hair is never a fraught, emotional, political issue. If you go to a school that has rules about the use of hair dye, then that is not the equivalent of being told to tame, if you want, what your hair naturally does. And it was calls to this program. Do you know, I don't think I've put this on the list of things that I owe my understanding entirely to you. But I think today we need to stretch that understanding a little further. 100 people, including my mate Beverly Knight and Fleur East as well, Professor Patrick Vernon, Evelyn Ford, are calling for the UK to become the first Western country to introduce a law to end Afro hair discrimination. So what I need from you to start with is examples of Afro hair discrimination. What does this actually mean? Most people will be unaware not only of its reality, but also of its profundity, also of the impact that it has upon you, or crucially perhaps your children. So what is Afro hair discrimination? Mel B and Paulette Hamilton have signed the petition as well. And then I want you to talk about the depth of it. So the reality of it is simply what happened. But why it is such an important issue is something that I think you probably need to have lived in order to properly explain. So I'll have a go, but there's something really colonial about Afro hair discrimination. I'm a bit haunted at the moment by a book that I'm reading. I've told you about it already. It's brilliant. But it's set in 1919 Calcutta. And even though I've read Empire Land by Satnam Sanghera, sometimes fiction can hit you harder than fact. I don't know why that is. Well, I do know why that is. It's because you're invested in the inner life of the characters that you're reading about. Whereas in non-fiction, you don't know about the inner life. You know, no historian ever writes about what people were feeling. I mean, they might speculate a little bit about what people were feeling at the time of a moment, but you don't know. You don't get full freedom, do you? You don't get full license to explain the inner life of the people about whom you're reading. So sometimes fiction set in a historical context can be more informative and more illuminating than non-fiction set in precisely the same historical era. And I think I mentioned to you yesterday that if you'd gone to the Bengal Club in Calcutta in 1919, and long afterwards, and various other clubs introduced by the British Empire, by the British government in India, you would have seen a sign that said, "No dogs or Indians." In your own country. I suppose apartheid era South Africa would probably be most similar. So I've been thinking as a consequence of that about colonialism in the context of imposing something upon utterly undeserving victims. And that can happen here. You don't have to go to Africa or India or anywhere else in order to see and this is me attempting to explain it, so you're welcome to laugh and tell me that I'm stupid and then tell me what's really going on here. But it seems to me that you are imposing from a position of incredible ignorance a behaviour, it's not even a value, is it, on people who are different, are not like you. You're ordering people to conform, even though it involves doing things that you will never have to do yourself. So I'm not explaining this as well as you will because I haven't felt it. I haven't lived it. I remember the first time I did this as a topic on LBC in a slightly, what's going on now? There's nothing wrong with schools having uniform policies, or, if that's the rules of the school, then I know I do this a bit at the moment. I tell you things I used to say like 15, 20 years ago, and you think surely that's not the king of the snowflakes. He never spoke like that, did he? But I would have done what you do if you haven't actually done the work, if you haven't worked on empathy or you haven't worked on therapy. You see everything exclusively through your own eyes. You see everything exclusively through the lens of your own experience. So I, as a white man who got into quite a lot of trouble at school, would see the question of schools telling black kids to sort out their Afro hair or to prevent them from coming to school if they had an Afro. I would see that in the same way as me being told to get my hair cut when I was at boarding school because they had a rule about the hair being above the collar. And that doesn't make me a bad person, but it makes me a little bit silly because those two experiences are completely different. But I was silly enough to come on the radio and say rules are rules. Uniform rules are uniform rules. If that's the uniform rule, then you have to obey it. And if you don't like obeying it, then you need to suck it up. I don't think that I have been there for a very, very long time. I hope I haven't been anywhere near that kind of position for a very, very long time. But I know that I was there when I first did this on the radio. I hope that it was the first time I did it when someone called me to tell me what I was getting horribly wrong and why the relationship between a black person, a black man or a black woman and their hair is 1,000,000 times more complicated than the average white person can understand. And that is why Afro hair discrimination is a very important, an emotionally loaded political issue. So what I want you to do is, A, tell me when it happened to you or yours, what actually happened, what it was, and B, why it is a matter of such profound importance. Because that is hard to communicate, I think. It's impossible for me to fully communicate it, and it won't be easy for you, but you've got a much better chance than I have because it speaks to much more than fashion. It speaks to much more than hairstyle. It speaks to identity. It speaks to, and again, feel free to laugh at me or tell me that I've got horribly wrong. It speaks to a racial ruling class telling victims of institutionalized racism what they have to look like. And the rest of us never get that. White people never get told that we're not allowed to look how we look naturally. We never get told that we've got to make quite serious changes to our physical appearance in order to appease the ruling class or in order to appease the authorities. And that's what I think is very hard for white people to properly grasp without proper help. And that is what we're going to try to provide today. I can't provide it. I've just proved that. But I want to know, and again, it'll be one of those things that changes. I bet your parents' attitude is different from yours. If you're my age, I bet your parents would just get your hair cut, just shave your head, just deal with it. Just I mean, of course, you put your hair in braids and you can get into trouble at school. And then you'll get someone saying, well, white children aren't allowed to put their hair in braids, so why should black people be allowed to put their hair in braids? So a fundamental, not always coming from a bad place, but a fundamental misunderstanding of the relationship between black hair and identity, and attempts to snuff it out. So parents would be, don't cause a fuss, don't cause a fuss, don't cause trouble. Whereas actually letting your hair grow naturally, which is something every white person on the planet, lucky enough to still have hair, no white person on the planet has ever really, unless they're in the military, questioned their right to let their hair grow freely. It's mad that when you think about it. I hope I haven't embarrassed myself or offended you in that attempt at explaining why I think this is a conversation worth having. But I'll tell you what, we'll soon find out. 0345 6060 973. And I must tell you that at 12:45, Matt Fry will join us with to tee up this potentially hugely important, not just for America, but for the whole world, whole universe, you could say. Hugely important debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump that is scheduled to take place this evening. But before that, World Afro Day and the necessity of making Afro hair a protected characteristic. It's 12:17.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:19 is the time. Just in case there's any incoming, I shall read this out from Foxy because I'm delighted to read it. As a black woman, James, well said. You've got it spot on. You've explained it well and you understand things. So it may well be that is a position I'm about to be disabused of, but you'll forgive me for enjoying it while it lasts. Jane's in Clapham Junction. Jane, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, hi.
Hello.
I think I also agree you've got it spot on. That's what it's all about.
Thank goodness for that.
I'm a mixed race woman, but I have big, curly Afro style hair that I love, and it's wild and it's big. a bit like Fleur Murray's, but longer. Yeah, sorry, Fleur East, but longer. And I'm also a teacher, and I wear my hair. I was working in a school, and I had worn my hair naturally for about 3 years. And then one day, I don't know why I decided to straighten it, but I had straightened it with ceramic straighteners.
Yeah.
And I was just walking, just because I can, and I decided to do it. And I was just walking along the corridor and had the head teacher sort of walking towards me. And she looked so happy, and she said, "Oh, your hair looks amazing. I love it like that. It looks really corporate. You should wear it like that every day."
She used the word corporate?
She used the word corporate. Yeah, she said it looks very corporate. And she said you should wear it like that every day. And I kind of just felt like deflated, that's not my hair. My hair's big, my hair's wild.
What did she mean? What do we think she meant? And I don't know her.
I think she just thought it looked tidier.
Yeah.
There was less of it. It's not as big. I don't know. I don't think she was aware. It was before people have become more aware of things. This was probably 2000.
So what I'm driving at is that she probably would have been mortified to learn how offensive she was being, potentially. I mean, she wasn't doing it from a...
No, she was a nice person. I don't think it was coming from a bad place, but it just left me feeling like, okay, I need to somehow tame.
Well, it means that every day you go to work with your hair looking natural, you feel that your employer, in this case, your boss, is going to be a little bit disappointed in you.
Yeah.
That's really weird, isn't it?
Yeah. And I mean, it's kind of... I had it throughout my childhood as well. I had a childminder, and she would always say, "Oh, your hair looks like a bird's nest," and things like that. And just, I did ballet, and I'd have to have it slicked back and in a bun, and it was quite difficult to get it in a bun.
How hard work is it, if you don't mind me asking?
It's fine, because I'm older now and I know what to do. I just have to never ever comb it when it's dry, and it's fine. As long as it's wet and I comb it, I can manage it. And I haven't straightened it for about 10 years though. So,
but there it is. So things are getting better. If I mean, I don't know if we're hearing it is a very, very mild discrimination you're describing, isn't it? Because nobody who has, for want of a better word, white hair including those of us who haven't got much of it left at the moment. But that would never happen to us. If we went to work having completely changed the way our hair naturally grows, it's highly unlikely that we would be complimented for it, or because there's something else going on, and that's why I'm at pains to stress she wasn't a bad person, but there is something else a little bit colonial going on under the surface. You shouldn't look like that. No. You shouldn't look the way that you naturally look. You should look more like I look. You should look more, and that's where the word corporate is a fascinating and very loaded word to use. Jane, thank you. Look, I mean, school is a place where there will be hair rules about going below the collar and things like that. But that is that is going to apply to everybody. It's not. I suppose Brian May is an interesting example of somebody who probably would have been told not to wear his hair in the way that he does. But I can't quite imagine a schoolboy with a Brian May haircut. Zulika is in Birmingham. Zulika, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Thank you for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
What it is, it was a situation during secondary school. And what it was, my parents are wrestlers. I grew up as a wrestler.
Yeah.
And during that time, my hair was uncovered. I wear it covered all the time.
Right.
And then I was just walking into school and I saw the head teacher.
Yeah.
And then she'd come up towards me and then she was like, "Oh, how come you have your hair covered?" And she was just questioning about that. And she's like, "We have other people who have locks and they have their locks out, but why don't you?"
Yeah.
And then she took me over to her office now, and then she had this word with me, and she just basically told me, she's like, "If you don't have your locks out, you'd be put into isolation." So I was like, okay then, I'm not uncovered in my locks, so I'll just be put into isolation. So I was put into isolation for the whole day of school. And then, when I got home, I told my mum, and the next day my mum came into the school and she gave a word to the head teacher. And then after that, the head teacher was fine. When she walked past me, she was just smiling. And
what did she give you an explanation of why she wanted? So what were you wearing? With what were you covering your locks?
Basically, it's just like a hair netting, just to cover my locks. So you couldn't see my locks or anything like that. And normally, as rastas, as women really wear their hair covered. So.
And did she explain? What's that beeping in the background? I hope you're not playing a video game while you're talking to me, Zulika.
No, what it is, it's actually my air mattress, and it's showing low pressure at the moment.
Well, that's a first for UK radio. I don't think that's ever happened. But if you ever hear that sound effect in the background again, we'll all know it's an air mattress showing low pressure. What do you think? Because I don't know that she told you from what you've related. What do you think her problem was, as it were? Was it just that? Because if you're allowed to wear your locks out, why would she have a problem with you wearing them up, so to speak? Why do you think
I wouldn't say she was being ignorant.
No.
But I was just basically think because she probably it's not something she sees normally.
And so she was just a temporarily discombobulated by the unfamiliar. And once your mum had set her straight, she was genuinely relaxed about it. She wasn't frightened of your mum or doing it because she was worried. Your mum just made her see that she was being a bit silly.
Yeah, I do believe so. I don't think she had anything bad or racist about it. I just think she probably hasn't seen a broad spectrum of people having locks, and some people don't have their locks covered.
And that is oddly, in my experience, the areas in which you most need legislation are the areas in which the discrimination is unintentional, actually. Because, obviously you need it in areas where it's intentional as well, but you would hope that good manners and civilised behaviour would root out behaviours that were deliberately discriminatory. But most people who've got a problem, end quotes, with Afro hair are not going to have the first idea about the potential offence that they're causing, or indeed the discrimination in which they are indulging. I wasn't, well, maybe I was, but we've got a most excellent Idiot's Corner for you here. This is Ian, who writes, "Wow, what a positive racist are you. During the punk era, many a person was told to sort their hair out. What a joke of a conversation stoking racism," writes Ian. So Ian is under the impression that your hair can naturally grow in a sort of bright green Mohican, or that the natural state of your hair, if you do absolutely nothing to treat it, would be to come out in heavily gelled spikes like Vivian in The Young Ones. That's crikey, Ian. What an amazing... And remember, Ian has listened to exactly the same radio programme that you've listened to. So he's heard me describe the difference between a hair-based discrimination that is targeting an entirely natural look, an entirely natural result, and hair-based discrimination that is based, for example, on dyeing or upon extreme haircuts or upon very deliberate attempts to mould your hair in a way that is extraordinary and or exceptional. And he's come away, has Ian, from listening to that under the impression that we are somehow leaving punks out of the equation. Mate, I'm grateful for all my listeners, all 1.4 million of them. But I do sometimes think you might be listening to the wrong program, because I don't know that I could have made things any simpler than I have. Although you're not on your own, because joining you in Idiot's Corner is Dwayne, who writes, James is doing his best to divide us again. I don't think it will work this time. I maybe that came in during the trades union hour, although it's timed 12:17. Maybe you're listening on catch up, but how are we, what, who, divide? Maybe. It's coming up to 12:30. Don't forget Matt Fry with us at 12:45 to look ahead to tonight's big debate in the United States of America. But before that, the very latest news headlines with Amelia Cox.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:33. This is from Isaac. Dear James, as a punk guitarist, I'd like to distance myself from your previous correspondent. Punk is about inclusiveness and acceptance of others. That fella needs to give his head a wobble. The relationship between blackness and hair, one of the many elements of ethnicity that I think many white people find hard to understand, but nothing's ever impossible. The best way to understand things that you are struggling to understand is to listen, which is what I'm trying to do. Jackie's in Horsham. Jackie, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi.
Hello.
Hello.
I did something wrong there, I think. We'll just double check that. And I will go to Bemmy, who's in Pitsea in Essex. Bemmy, what made you pick up the phone?
I think it was more majority of the callers that called in and the lady that said she had dreads.
Yes.
And I feel like dreads is a hairstyle that is, I think, untidy and unattractive to most people. So I have dreads. I haven't always had dreads, but I just felt like it was an easier way to maintain my hair without it falling out. But one day I decided to change my hair because I can, because I have wigs, I have hair extensions.
Yes.
Went to work and everybody was like, oh my God, you should wear your hair like this more often. I prefer it like this.
Right.
Okay, so in my mind, that's your preference, that's great, but it's how I would like to wear my hair. And I just feel like you've had an opinion, but because I've done something different...
Do you know... Yeah, go on. Sorry.
You're now vocal about it because you feel like I've given you an avenue to do that. I am a joking person. I did smile, but at the same time, it's like, okay, so my normal hairstyle, you hate it, basically.
And I wonder... And I am wondering, I'm not stating, how often... I mean, I might say to you that I love your hair.
Yeah. But you don't have to if you don't.
No, but I'm just thinking whether a white woman at work would ever receive the message that a colleague didn't like your previous hairstyle. Or do you see what I mean? There's a difference between saying, I love your hair, and saying I really prefer it to what it was like before.
Yeah, exactly. So it's different. If you were to say, oh my God, your hair's amazing, that's great, but you didn't stop there. You went further to say, I prefer your hair this way. And I feel like, as I was saying...
It's the use of the word preference that is unwittingly discriminatory.
Yes. And as I was telling your colleague, she did ask me a question, do you think it should be illegal to discriminate against Afro? Yes, that could probably be a massive step, but I think we're all going to jump the gun here because it's not going to happen.
Well, no one's going to get locked up because no one is going to push the point, are they? No one's going to go, having been told that you're no longer allowed to discriminate against people. I don't think you're going to get Afro martyrs. You're not going to get headmistresses who carry on excluding children from school for turning up with their natural hairstyle after anti-discrimination legislation has been brought in. But the question of what would happen if you did remains pertinent. And And I don't know that any of us can ever prove, if you go for a job interview and you come up against someone who doesn't like...
I did say that to her, and I said, if you decide to put that through as law, and it went through, I guarantee you, majority of the black people would change their hairstyle to land a job.
Yeah.
So, and I think we already do it. We already conform without even knowing it, because we've been conditioned by others that, oh gosh, this type of hairstyle is... like the other lady said, it's not... what's the word she used?
I don't know. You should have been paying attention.
Corporate.
What, corporate? Yes, I mean, that was a fascinating word to use, wasn't it? A really fascinating word to use. As if corporate people don't look like you normally look. That's not... You don't look like that if you're corporate, which is really discriminatory, albeit, as we established, that woman would have been gutted to discover what she'd done.
But it happens actively.
Yeah, of course it does.
My husband has been to interviews or has started jobs and was like, do you know what? I've got to change the way I wear my dreads. I've got to make it calmer. I've got to make it look extra neat. So there is sort of homework done on our hair before we leave the house.
Yeah, I know exactly that, and it's just an area. It's an area that it is impossible to understand unless it's explained to people like me by people like you. And something else I should explain. It is World Afro Day today. Hang on, no, World Afro Day is on the 15th of September, and this is part of the World Afro Day campaign. So it's 5 days hence. I got that a little bit wrong. Idiot's Corner's busy this hour, as you would expect, because we are seeking to treat people of colour identically to white people and pointing out some of the difficulties to that journey towards equality, which people like Alan find almost unbearable, given that, of course, if you've spent your whole life enjoying privilege, then equality can feel like oppression. So Alan writes, cry me a river over a bloody compliment. World's gone mad. Get talking about more pressing issues, like prisoners being released, which is what the first hour of the programme was about, and pensioners' winter allowance, which was what the first hour of yesterday's programme was about. So I don't know what your excuse is, Alan, but I wish you all the very best. Denise is in Derby. Denise, what would you like to say?
Hey, thanks, Ryan. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
You're most
welcome. Really quickly, just the quick things. That word corporate, it rings in my mind so clearly because of being at school and thinking we used to have like a careers teacher. And I remember him saying to a group of us about, we're talking about appearance when you go for job interviews. And I can still hear him saying, you know, having hair like yours may not help.
So this is what? Yeah, I know, but he was right. Because the discrimination exists, so it's such a fascinating equation, that, isn't it? Because you don't want to live in the world he's describing, but you do.
Yeah, but then it made me think back. I don't know, many of your listeners who are non-black would know that, like, natural hair, we used to do like hair straightening, and I'm not talking with a chemical. No. Yeah. We used to have a hot comb.
Yes.
Yeah, a hot comb. And I remember having the hot comb on my hair to get rid of my natural kink. And I remember things like watching music programs on TV, and the successful artists had straight hair. So we used to pretend to be like them. And we would put a cardigan on our head and stand in front of a mirror with a brush pretending that we were superstars because they had a look of that straight hair. And so I recognized that. And a friend of mine, only a couple of years ago, she's from Austria. She's a HR person for one of the major high street banks.
Yes.
And she said it wasn't that long ago that people came for jobs in the banks. It was clear in her documentation that if they had hair of a certain type, they may not be suitable for the bank. So it's not that long ago. And bear in mind, we talk about long hair. We also had an issue with a school in Derby where two boys, twin brothers, because of the way how we are, our parents would have for boys, have their hair nice and neat. Nice and neat is a number one. Yeah?
Yeah.
Number one.
That's right. And you've got little choice.
Right, okay. So you have a number one hairstyle, you go to school, but the school, a Catholic school in Derby, had real big issues with that. And the headmaster suspended the children, those two boys, because of the length of their hair. and they were sent home until their hair grew longer because guess what? They look like skinheads.
Which I suppose you could offer up as a I don't know, a counterbalance form of discrimination, except when it comes to authenticity. That's the word that's been missing. You're being discriminated against because of your authentic self.
Of course. And if you didn't, and you know, my uncles and my cousins will tell you, if we would not send our children, maybe now, but if you go to school with a high top, a high hair, you know, that kind of length of hair, it would be a problem. You'd be looking untidy. And so, you know, your parents would put a basin around your head and cut your hair and keep it nice and short, because that's what we were told to do.
I think it's still true, actually. It may not be quite as explicit anymore, but it's definitely still true. Otherwise the campaign wouldn't be necessary, would it?
Of course, yeah. And then it moves on to, obviously, chemical straightening, that women do, or chemically straighten their hair. And then, of course, lots of, you know, it's very popular now, people having hair extensions on their hair, and they always go for this long look because there is something within us that tells us that is what's acceptable.
Well, this is good hair and bad hair. This is what the Chris Rock film is about. Have you seen it?
Right, exactly. I've seen it. Have you watched it?
No, I've only discovered it because so many people are telling me I need to watch it. Well, I'm going to now, but
and then do the show again.
well, hang on. I thought I was doing all right, Denise. Honestly, everyone's a bloody critic.
Darling, you are doing fantastic, and I'm really glad that you're covering it. But it'll be fantastic. No, once you've watched that, Good Hair, Bad Hair, Chris Rock.
Yeah.
Do this. Well, if it's next year for Black Hair Day, Afro Day,
I'll make a point. I'll put it in my diary because for people who don't know, which was me until 2 minutes ago, his 3-year-old daughter asked him, "Daddy, how come I don't have good hair?"
There you go. So it goes back deeper. So even within our own culture, having good hair is having straighter type of hair.
Yeah.
So have a guess. I never had good hair.
Have a guess at what the black-owned hair industry, a lot of which is dedicated to doing the things you've just described, to the chemical relaxers, to the straightening. Have a guess what it's worth every year.
Oh, billions, millions, a lot. I know that.
A lot. You're right. It's a lot, Denise. It's a lot. You got it. It's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
Thank you. It's $9 billion, and that looks like that looks really, really interesting. Actually, that film. It came out in 2009, so the need for the campaign was clear then, and it is clear now. I just noticed it was at Sundance, actually. It was at the Sundance Film Festival. I don't think I recommended a film to you. It's quite a controversial film, I have to stress. It's unlikely to go down well among the unionist movement in the north of Ireland. But there's a film out called Kneecap, which it's absolutely incredible. It's one of the most extraordinary experiences I've ever had in a cinema. It's like being picked up and bounced around the room like a squash ball or a hacky sack. And then I had the absolutely incredible experience. I watched it all the way through to the end. It's largely in Irish, so it might qualify for the best foreign film at the Oscars. Although I also loved The Count of Monte Cristo the other day, so I'd be quite torn. I got to the end of it, and I know the bloke who wrote and directed it. I used to work with him a bit on the Showbiz Beat. He was on the Daily Star when I was on the Daily Express. Well, how the hell has he ended up writing and directing absolutely brilliant films? But coming from the background as a showbiz reporter on the Daily Star, he's a genius. He was also responsible. His name's Rich Pepiat, actually, and he doesn't get anything like the love he deserves. He was responsible for a stage show that became a film called One Rogue Reporter, which, with regard to the print media, and the intellectual and moral corruption that we talk about a lot on this program, the bravery of what he did when he made that. He did some incredible undercover work as well. So in fact, as soon as I remembered that he was the same fellow responsible for One Rogue Reporter, which you can watch on YouTube, and trust me, you will not forget it when you've watched it. Of course, he could go on and make an absolutely brilliant film like Kneecap, which I stress again, I fully appreciate the difficulties that it may cause members of the unionist or Protestant community in the north of Ireland. But objectively speaking, it's a banging film.
James O'Brien on LBC.
49 is the time. We've somehow managed to avoid all mention of the Conservative Party leadership battle, so I'll break that now and tell you that Kemi Badenoch reportedly intervened to stop Kneecap, the band about whom the film Kneecap is based on, or not based on, stars and features and tells their entire story. She intervened to stop them getting a grant, so all the more reason to go and see that film, I think, perhaps. 12:49 is the time. Matt Fry is here, of course, LBC presenter. 10 a.m. on Saturdays, this very slot every Saturday morning, and anchor of Channel 4 News. And tonight, helming the coverage of the Trump versus Kamala, or the Kamala versus Trump debate. It's a fairly obvious question, but how important is it? And we're live on Global Player right now, are we? Yes. So I thought you wanted me to say that we were live on Global Player, that we were going to do the debate live on Global Player. What's the point of telling people listening to the radio that I'm live on Global Player now with Matt Fry? Envision.
Because it's all about the Global Player.
It's all about the Global Player. We love the Global Player.
The rules change all the time, James. I don't know how you keep up.
Did you know you're on the Global Player?
I know, I'm on
live.
the Global Player. I'm so happy to be on the Global Player. We're waving hello to the Global Player. Hi. Hello, Global Player.
Hey, on YouTube.
All right.
How important is it?
Well, this one is particularly important. And, before the last one, people were saying, well, they don't really move the dial. Maybe a little bit. And then, of course, that one destroyed the dial. Biden would not have bowed out of the race had it not been for his disastrous performance in that debate. So this time around, Kamala Harris, who's known to Democrats, especially those who follow the convention, which I was at a few weeks ago, where she did pretty well. But she's not known to the majority of American voters, partly because also being vice president, you are literally the spare, and you don't get to do much that's very high profile. So people have been defining Kamala Harris, especially the other side, the Republicans, mostly in a negative way. And it is her job tonight to define herself before the American electorate. Trump's job is, and everyone has an opinion on Trump, it's either good or it's bad, it's rarely in between. Trump's job is to win over some of those people, the few people who might still be in the middle, but also to restrain himself and try and prevent the worst of Trump coming out, because we know that the only person who can really defeat Donald Trump is a guy called Donald Trump.
And he's been doing a fairly good job of that lately. He's got himself into uncharacteristically muddled scenarios, and the appointment of J.D. Vance possibly looking like a fairly epic misstep.
The biggest misstep is what he's been saying himself. Trump was so focused on Sleepy Joe, as he called the president, that when Kamala Harris came along, it didn't quite work. And what he should be doing, and what his advisors have been telling him to do every single day, is to mention three things: the economy, immigration and crime. And then add to that the question, which he might do tonight: were you better off 4 years ago than you are now? That's the question that Ronald Reagan famously asked Jimmy Carter. Well, yes. The answer is no. I mean, and these are not all because of Joe Biden.
Sure.
But, inflation, although the numbers are down, they're certainly better than ours. Americans feel as if the cost of living is strangling them, and in many cases it is. Crime is worse in many cases than it was in many places, and immigration is certainly up. And the rhetoric used by this administration around all these issues has been, frankly, faulty. And of course, Kamala Harris's challenge, James, will be to say, well, on one level, I'm the agent of change. I'm a woman of colour. I'll be the first female president.
But she doesn't play that card. She doesn't do what Clinton did she?
Doesn't need to.
No.
The trouble with Clinton was that she would have been the first female president, but her femininity was overshadowed by the fact that she was a Clinton.
Yes.
There was more baggage there than there was on United Airlines.
She did bang on about it a lot.
She did, because she had to, in a way.
Yes. Okay.
She had to remind people that she was a woman as well as a Clinton.
But as a voter, it might have made me think that this was more about her than it was about me.
Yeah, that's possible. And Kamala Harris has been quite good at aping that Obama language. This is about you and not about me.
Exactly.
So that was very good. I mean, in a way, what she's offering America is a community of inclusion. What Trump is offering America is a fortress of exclusion, right? Now, depending on where you stand on that issue, you go for one or the other.
And yet, here's the thing, Matt, that we discuss, you and me, it's not a criticism of you, we're discussing this as a sort of balanced battle between equal and opposite forces. I think that last picture that you drew is absolutely accurate, the inclusion versus exclusion. But Donald Trump, a multiple convicted felon and adjudicated rapist, his speeches are not peppered with lies. It's as if moments of truth are accidental and
they're peppered with truth.
They're peppered with truth. And yet the only language that the media has got to describe this clash, these battles, it involves necessarily a form of equivalence, a form of balance. It's like there's one person turning up with a copy of the Queensberry Rules and one person turning up for a knife fight.
I would say it slightly differently.
Yeah.
America's so tribal. It is so either you're with us, or you're against us, that if you talk to Trump people and you point out all those lies, and, there are plenty of people in the mainstream media who do that all the time, the cult around Trump just doesn't listen.
Yeah.
They don't believe you. They think because you're saying it, James O'Brien or Matt Fry, it has to be a lie in itself. And to some extent, to really unravel why America is so messed up, why it's so toxic, why it's so divided, you have to look at the media landscape where, on both sides, people are singing to the choir. The left never questions its own assumptions. The right never questions its own assumptions. There is nothing in the middle. There are no arbitrators that say, well, hang on a minute, here's the fact check, here are the lies, here's the truth. She also has told lies, not as many as Donald Trump. But the problem is this. When you have a country where both sides believe that if the other side wins, it is the end of their version of the republic. It is literally the end of their world, that either America will become a communist dystopia or a fascist dystopia. And if you then don't agree on the rules of the game, which is where we get back to the last election, 2020, you're in big trouble, because then the only solution to winning or losing that game of Monopoly is to kick the board. And when you kick the board, you don't have democracy.
And how big a risk is that? I mean, in the event there's two things. See, this again is where the imbalance becomes untenable. No one is going to fear for the future of American democracy if Kamala Harris wins, unless Donald Trump does something. And people are going to fear for the future of American democracy if Donald Trump wins. So how...
And I think that is an accurate way of putting it. I mean, we used to say before the first election that got Trump elected in 2016, you got to take him seriously, but not literally. It turns out you have to do both.
Take him literally, yes.
Right, and seriously.
Yeah.
And he's got form in terms of overturning democracy, because we know, and it's proven, that he tried to do so in 2020. We know that he had a hand in January the 6th, which was, an insurrectionist act. And we know that the Democrats have not tried to do that. They have not done the same. What makes it more complicated still is that the Supreme Court of the United States, which has a conservative majority, thanks to 3 justices appointed by Trump, he was very lucky in the sense that he got 3 vacancies, has essentially passed a ruling recently where any act, however criminal it might be in a civil court, committed by a president, is not an act of crime that should be judged in a court. So essentially...
That's dystopian.
It's dystopian, but I mean, some of those things will be handed down to lower courts.
Sure.
But when the Supreme Court rules that the president can more or less do whatever he likes as a president...
He cannot commit a crime.
He cannot commit a crime. And motive doesn't come into it. I mean, that is a really scary picture.
It certainly is. You remind me of something I was thinking earlier in the week when you talk about the absolute intractability of the base. That means that interventions from people like Dick Cheney are probably not going to nudge the needle at all.
No. I mean, who would have thought that the Cheney family, who were literally, the bread and butter of right-wing Republicans, Hawks Hawk. I mean, I covered Dick Cheney's vice presidency. He was an extraordinarily, acerbic, clever, and rather funny man with a very dry sense of humour. Who had survived 4 heart attacks, who started working in the Nixon White House when he was 36 years old or something. He was vice president. And by the way, he was the guy who was told to find a vice president by George Bush, a suitable candidate. And after a few weeks of looking, said, I am that candidate. This guy is now the reasonable voice of the Republican Party, which has literally been, distilled down to a handful of people.
That's the bit, even though you explain it so brilliantly, intellectually I grasp it, but emotionally I still don't get it. I still don't understand how somebody like Dick Cheney can be clear about
because something has happened in America. Because something has happened in America, and this is not entirely the fault of Trump or the fault of the Republicans. Something has happened there, that there are so many people in America who feel not just left behind, but feel ignored or condescended against or to by the so-called metropolitan elites. Yeah. And there is something in that.
Sure.
And the Democrats haven't found a way of talking to those Republicans, and the Republicans demonize the Democrats who try. So it's
you can't do it, because you say, why do these people believe things that aren't true? And they say, listen to them saying that you believe things that aren't true. They're so condescending. But it doesn't stop the things being untrue.
It's true.
So
that is true.
It's an Egyptian riddle.
But also they're not trying hard enough anymore. That's basically an echo chamber. And of course, we are not an echo chamber on LBC, because
certainly not.
We talk to each other all the time, don't we?
We certainly do. And very occasionally.
And we don't always agree with each other.
Yes, we do. Very occasionally.
That's what you think.
How dare you? Very occasionally we listen to each other as well. Matt Fry with you on LBC, of course, on Saturdays with you.
And tonight.
And tonight.
1:30 in the middle of the night on Channel 4. And of course, you'll get the extracts of that on LBC and the Global Player.
You can also enjoy the debate live on Global Player. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on catch up on Global Player, where you'll also find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as all of Global's live radio stations. So download Global Player for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick with you at 4, but now on LBC, it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.